Hello everyone, I'm the storyteller, and today I'll take you on a spooky story. But don't worry, it will be a gentle and relaxing journey before you drift off to sleep. If you're looking for a tale that's just mysterious enough and gentle enough to relax to, then you've come to the right place. Now, find yourself a comfortable space, close your eyes, and let the story begin. Story 1: The Ghosts Waiting Under the Bridge. It had been years since I left the town behind, but even time couldn't dull the memories. I never thought I'd return. For decades, the idea of coming back was something I buried under the weight of guilt and shame. But here I was, standing on the outskirts of the seaside town, watching the familiar skyline rise from the horizon. The salt in the air brought me back to childhood, a time that felt both distant and painfully close, like an old song that still clings to the edges of your mind. The town had changed, though. Most of it was unrecognizable now. What had once been a bustling community full of life and hope had turned into a ghost of itself. Boarded up windows, cracked sidewalks, and an overwhelming sense of abandonment surrounded me. I felt a heavy pressure in my chest as I took a step forward. The pavement beneath my shoes, like the first crack of ice underfoot. It was too much, too overwhelming. But I wasn't here to reminisce. No, I was here to face something far darker. Something I had been running from my entire life. It wasn't hard to find the old pier. It had been my brother Vic's favorite place, the place where his life had ended. I had been standing on that very pier, watching him dive into the water beneath it, too terrified to help, too paralyzed by fear to do anything. That night had changed me in ways I never fully understood. Vic had always been the golden child, my father's pride, my mother's joy. He had a sense of adventure that I lacked. He was fearless. He dared to swim beneath the pier, where the current was strongest, where the rocks below could tear you apart. It had been reckless, but it wasn't unusual for him. And for years, I had convinced myself that I'd done the right thing by not jumping in after him. But the guilt never left. As I approached the remains of the pier, memories flooded my mind. The pier wasn't the grand structure it used to be. Time had eaten away at it, just like it had eaten away at the town. The weathered wood groaned beneath the weight of years, its once proud beams now sunken and warped. The old concert hall that had stood at the edge of the pier was nothing but a pile of rubble now. Nature had reclaimed what man had built, but what really caught my eye wasn't the decay of the pier itself. It was the faint shadow that clung to it, like a reminder of all the things I hadn't faced. I remembered my mother's voice, the story she used to tell us about the architect, Ernest Dunway, who had designed the pier. She said he had built it in a fever of obsession, a man driven to madness by his failure to realize his dream. Dunway had been a visionary, but in the end, his creation had been his undoing. Some said he had died a broken man, his obsession with the pier consuming him. I found myself standing near the place where the old concert hall had once stood. The memory of the crowds, the music, and the laughter, all replaced by the ominous stillness of the wreckage. The air felt thick, heavy, as if the very weight of what had happened here still hung in the atmosphere. I could almost hear Vic's voice, his laughter, as if he was still here with me. I closed my eyes, trying to push the memory away. But it wasn't just the pier that haunted me. It was the knowledge that I had never made peace with what happened. No matter how much time had passed, the guilt remained. It clawed at my insides, a constant, gnawing feeling that I couldn't escape. I walked closer, past the remnants of the old pier, my feet dragging through the dirt and scattered debris. Each step felt like an effort, like the ground itself was trying to pull me down, back into the past. But I pressed on. I needed to do this. I needed to confront it. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of the sea, and with it, a sense of unease washed over me. The air was thick with tension, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder as if expecting someone to be watching me. But there was no one, just the wind and the silence. Suddenly, I stopped in my tracks. There, barely visible beneath the tangle of overgrown vines and the rusted remnants of the old pier supports, was something I hadn't expected to see. A small, weathered plaque. I bent down to get a closer look. The plaque read, Ernest Dunway, 1832, 1908, architect of the old pier, lived here. I stared at the plaque for a long moment, the name stirring something deep within me. It was strange. I'd heard the name before, countless times. My mother had always spoken of Dunway in reverent tones, as if he was some kind of tragic genius. But there was something about seeing his name here, etched into the decaying wood, that sent a shiver down my spine. The air seemed to grow heavier, thicker, with an odd kind of energy. The town, the pier, the memories. Everything seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I stood there for a while, just staring at the plaque. My mind wandered back to that night, to the last moments I had seen Vic alive. He had smiled at me, carefree, as he dove beneath the pier, and I had hesitated. That hesitation had cost him his life. And now, decades later, I was still haunted by it, still stuck in that moment of fear, unable to move, unable to act. A soft rustling sound broke me from my thoughts. It came from behind me, from the direction of the pier's crumbling supports. I spun around, heart pounding in my chest. My breath caught in my throat. Nothing, just the wind. But something was different. Something had shifted. The world around me felt off, as if the very air had thickened with the weight of all the past sins, all the guilt, all the things I'd never said, never done. The shadows beneath the pier seemed to deepen, pulling at my attention like the darkness itself was alive. I shook my head, trying to shake the feeling. I couldn't linger here. Not now. Not with these memories clawing at me. But as I turned to leave, something stopped me. A soft whisper on the wind, almost like a voice, calling my name. I paused, my blood running cold. I didn't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't this. The air felt charged now, as though the very atmosphere around me had thickened, swirling with something ancient, something restless. I swallowed hard and took a step forward, then another, and then another, my feet dragging through the dust of the past. But no matter how far I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, that the past was reaching out to claim me, just as it had claimed Vic. The quiet followed me like a dark shadow, a presence that pressed down on my chest and made it hard to breathe. I'd walked away from the pier, convinced that leaving would help me escape the suffocating weight of my memories. But the further I walked from it, the more I realized that running from the past had never worked before. It wouldn't work now. The town still felt foreign, but oddly familiar at the same time. The streets were empty, no sounds of children playing or people chatting over morning coffee. Just the quiet, the thick silence that hung in the air. It was as if everyone had vanished, like I was the last person left in a place that had long since lost its life. I turned the corner and found myself on the main street, passing by old stores that had long since closed down. Their signs were faded, peeling, as if they too had been abandoned to rot with the town. I walked, not really knowing where I was going, only that I couldn't stop. Not yet. Not while the memories were still clawing at my mind, making it hard to think straight. I passed the old diner where my father used to take us after church on Sundays. The windows were boarded up, and the door hung loosely on its hinges. Inside, I could just make out the remnants of the old booths, the ones that used to be filled with laughter and the clink of coffee cups. Now, it was just dust and ghosts. I kept moving, my feet dragging as if the ground itself was trying to pull me back. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the town, and the chill of the evening started to creep in. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, but it didn't help. The cold wasn't just from the air. It was something deeper, something that sank into my bones. I was nearing the edge of town when I noticed something strange. A house. It wasn't one I recognized, and yet it looked so familiar. The shape of it, the way the roof sagged in the middle, the peeling white paint. It was as if it had been frozen in time, stuck between the present and the past. My pulse quickened, a tight knot forming in my stomach. I didn't want to go closer. I didn't want to relive any more memories, but my feet moved of their own accord, pulling me toward it, toward the house that had once been my home. It stood there, silent and still, as if waiting for something to happen, waiting for me. I hesitated just outside the front gate. The lawn was overgrown, the fence leaning to one side, but there was something hauntingly inviting about it. I could hear the faint hum of the wind through the trees, but the house itself felt like it was holding its breath, like it was waiting for me to step inside. I didn't want to, but I couldn't stop myself. I pushed the gate open, the hinges creaking loudly in the quiet, and stepped onto the overgrown path that led to the front door. The house was darker now, its windows black like empty eyes. It wasn't like I remembered it, not like the home I had grown up in, filled with warmth and the scent of my mother's cooking. No, this place felt dead, cold. I reached for the door, my hand trembling, and pushed it open. The wood groaned, the hinges screeching in protest. Inside, the house was a mausoleum. Dust hung in the air like smoke, and everything was covered in a thin layer of decay. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet as I moved through the living room, past the old fireplace where we used to gather around as a family. The mantel was bare now, the photographs gone, replaced by empty space. I walked deeper into the house, the oppressive silence pressing in from all sides. The walls seemed to close in around me, the house itself feeling like a cage. Then I heard it, a soft sound. At first I thought it was just the house settling, the way old buildings sometimes creak and groan when the wind hits them just right. But then it came again, soft like a whisper, a voice. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart hammering in my chest. "Kevin!" The voice was faint, barely audible, but it sent a chill down my spine. It sounded so familiar, like a memory I couldn't quite place. I turned toward the sound, my eyes scanning the dimly lit hallway. Nothing. "Kevin, please." There it was again, louder this time. a voice that seemed to be coming from the stairs. I took a hesitant step forward, my legs like lead as I moved toward the staircase. My breath caught in my throat. The house was alive in a way I hadn't expected. Not in the sense that it was haunted. No, it was something more unsettling. The air was thick with the weight of things left unsaid, of actions never taken. It was as if the house itself remembered everything, the love, the fights, the loss. I reached the bottom of the stairs and froze. There, at the top, was a figure. It was blurry, a shadow against the dim light. "Vic," I whispered, my voice shaky, my heart thumping in my chest. The figure didn't respond, but I felt something shift in the air. A cold draft, a sudden pressure in the room, like the walls were closing in. I took a step forward, my heart racing. "Vic, is that you?" The figure at the top of the stairs shifted again, but it didn't move. It just stood there, watching, waiting. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and ran out of the house, not caring where I was going, just needing to escape. The door slammed behind me, and I stood there on the front steps, gasping for air. But the voice, I could still hear it in my head. "Kevin, come back." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. I needed answers. I needed to understand why the house felt like this, why it had drawn me back in, why it was so haunted by the past. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, someone, was waiting for me. The town was silent again, but now it felt different. The shadows felt deeper, the air heavier. And I realized in that moment that I wasn't the only one who had come back. Something had been waiting, and it wasn't going to let me go until I faced it. I couldn't escape the town. It was as if I had never left. Every street corner, every cracked sidewalk, every rusting sign seemed to pull me back in, like the place itself was keeping me hostage. There were days I wished I had just turned around when I first saw the pier. There were moments, deep in the quiet of the night, when I thought about backing up, hopping in my car, and driving far away from this place. But I couldn't. Something was stopping me, chaining me to this cursed town like an anchor tied to my soul. The house, the pier, the streets, they were all filled with ghosts, not the kind you read about in stories or see in movies. No, these were different. These were the ghosts of my past, the mistakes I had buried, the promises I had broken. And they were clawing their way out of the shadows one by one, bringing with them the weight of everything I had failed to confront. It was the night after I'd seen that figure at the top of the stairs. The shadow that had called my name, that had whispered Vic's name with an urgency I couldn't ignore. The next day, I couldn't bring myself to visit the house again. Instead, I went back to the pier. It seemed like the only place where my thoughts could find some semblance of clarity. It had always been my brother's place, our place. Vic had loved the pier more than anything. It was where he had been the happiest, swimming beneath its arches, exploring the forgotten nooks beneath the wooden beams. But even as I walked toward it, something felt wrong. The air had a thickness to it, a coldness that settled in my chest. It wasn't the chill of the night air. It was something else, something deeper, something that weighed heavy on my heart. I felt like I was being watched, like 1,000 unseen eyes were on me, waiting for me to make my next move. I reached the pier, the long stretch of decaying wood, now even more desolate than I remembered. The waves lapped against the supports in a rhythmic, monotonous sound that only heightened the feeling of isolation. I could hear the faint echo of Vic's voice in my mind, see the flash of his grin as he dove into the water that night. The water beneath the pier was darker than it should have been. The moonlight shimmered on the surface, but it didn't reflect the way it used to. The water looked murky, as if something was hiding beneath it. I took a step closer to the edge, my mind racing with the thoughts of that night, the night I had failed him. I hadn't wanted to jump in. I had told myself it was too dangerous, that I couldn't risk my own life to save him. But now, standing here, I realized how weak that reasoning had been. I hadn't jumped in because I was scared. I hadn't saved him because I was selfish. And I had carried that guilt with me for years. I couldn't just stand there. Not anymore. I turned, walking along the pier's edge, my mind lost in thought. The night was silent, save for the soft sound of my footsteps on the rotting wood. It was so quiet that even the smallest sound seemed to echo in the vast emptiness. I walked past the remnants of the concert hall, now nothing more than piles of rubble. Once, it had been a place of joy and music, a place where people gathered to forget their troubles. Now, it was just another decaying relic of the past, just another symbol of what had been lost. The feeling of being watched grew stronger the further I walked. I stopped, looking over my shoulder, but there was nothing behind me. Still, the sensation clung to me, like an invisible hand brushing against the back of my neck. My heartbeat quickened, my breathing shallow. "Vic," I whispered, though I knew he couldn't answer. "Are you here?" The wind picked up, rustling through the remnants of the broken pier, and for a brief moment, I thought I heard something. A soft whisper, a faint voice, like someone calling my name from far away. But the wind quickly drowned it out, and I stood there, straining to hear anything that might give me a clue as to what was happening. I stepped forward again, but this time, my foot caught on something. I stumbled and nearly fell, my hands reaching out to steady myself. When I looked down, I saw what I had tripped over. A small weathered object, half buried in the dirt and sand. I knelt down, brushing away the grime, and picked it up. It was an old photograph, faded and worn with age. I stared at it, my heart skipping a beat. The image was of a man standing proudly in front of a group of people. It took me a moment to recognize the face, but when I did, my stomach dropped. It was Ernest Dunway, the architect, the man my mother had spoken of so often. But something was wrong with the photograph. Dunway's face, though clear, seemed to shift in the light. His smile, once warm and proud, now seemed twisted, almost sinister. It was as if the image itself was trying to tell me something, trying to warn me. I stood up, my hand still holding the photograph, my mind racing. Why was this here? Why was it buried beneath the pier? And why did it feel like the past was reaching out to me, pulling me deeper into its grasp? I needed to leave. I needed to get away from this place, from the memories, from the ghosts that seemed to haunt me at every turn. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. In the distance, near the ruins of the concert hall, I saw a figure. It was standing in the shadows, just out of the reach of the moonlight. It was too far away for me to make out any details, but I could feel its presence. I could feel it watching me. And I knew, in that moment, that I wasn't alone. I wasn't sure if it was Vic, if it was the ghost of the past, or if it was something else entirely. But I knew I had to find out. I had to face whatever it was that was waiting for me. I started walking toward the figure, my steps slow and deliberate, each one heavier than the last. As I got closer, the figure didn't move. It stood there, still and silent, like a monument to something that had long since passed. And then, just as I was about to call out, it vanished. Just like that, gone. The silence returned, more suffocating than before. I stood there, frozen, my heart racing. Had I imagined it? Had my mind been playing tricks on me? Or had something truly been standing there, waiting for me to notice? I didn't know. I didn't want to know. But I had to face it. I had to face everything. Because the ghosts that were waiting under the bridge, they weren't going anywhere. And neither was I. Story 2, Between Death and Dreams. I woke up to an unsettling silence, an eerie calm that gnawed at my senses. I tried to move, but the weight of the air around me felt heavier than it should have been. It was a strange, disorienting sensation, almost as if the very air itself was pressing down, reluctant to let me go. I pushed myself to sit up, and the coolness of the ground beneath me sent a shiver through my spine. The grass, tall and smooth, brushed against my skin as I struggled to make sense of the scene. The world around me was wrong. Everything seemed slightly off. The grass wasn't quite the green I expected, more of a pale gold, waving gently in the breeze, like it was trying to hide some deeper secret. The trees towered over me, their trunks deep red like aged wine, their leaves vibrant yellowish shades that shimmered under the sunlight, casting an unnatural glow over the landscape. It felt like an autumn that never ended, a place suspended in time. I blinked, trying to clear the fog from my mind. I couldn't remember how I got here. My last clear memory was nothing. It was a blank, a void. But before that, I remember standing in a rundown garage sale, inspecting an old denim shirt on a weathered table. The shirt had a figure stitched onto the back, the hermit from the tarot deck, holding a lantern. I'd always been drawn to the symbolism of the hermit, alone, searching for truth. But why had I bought it? I couldn't remember. I glanced around, disoriented. There were no signs of life. No birds, no insects. Just the wind rustling the golden blades of grass. The silence here was overwhelming, pressing on my ears, filling the space where noise should be. I could hear my heartbeat, quick and erratic, reverberating in the otherwise quiet air. Then I noticed something, or rather someone, a figure, standing a few feet away. At first, it didn't register in my mind. I stared at the shape, trying to piece it together. But it wasn't until she took a step forward that I realized what I was seeing. A woman. She had long golden hair that flowed like threads of sunlight, and her eyes were pale blue, almost translucent. Her presence was as unnatural as the landscape itself, and yet there was a strange calmness about her. I froze, caught in the moment. My voice wouldn't come. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. My words stuck behind a wall of confusion. "You're awake," she said softly, her voice almost musical. "Good. You'll need time to adjust." Her eyes studied me with an unreadable expression, though there was a gentleness there. She wasn't menacing, but neither did she seem entirely real. "Where am I?" I finally managed to croak, my voice sounding foreign, even to my own ears. "This is the meadow between worlds," she replied. her voice still carrying that tranquil, otherworldly cadence. It's where souls come to rest for a time before moving on. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. My breath caught in my chest. Souls? What do you mean? I asked, my voice growing shaky. She tilted her head slightly, as if considering how to answer. I should have known you wouldn't remember. It's all part of the process, I suppose. She spoke as though it was nothing out of the ordinary, as if I should understand. I stood up, a wave of dizziness crashing over me. I had to steady myself against the nearest tree, a trunk so smooth and cold, it almost felt like stone. I don't understand. I'm not dead, I'm alive. I can feel my heart, I can feel my body. I protested, my words growing more frantic. The world around me didn't make sense. How could I be dead if I still felt like this? You're neither alive nor dead. Not yet, she explained calmly, taking a few steps closer to me. This is the waiting place, the pause before the next step. The world you left behind no longer applies. You've been brought here because it's time for you to decide what comes next. I shook my head in disbelief. Decide? What do you mean? I don't know exactly. Some souls move on, some are recycled, she said, her tone shifting slightly, becoming more distant. Some will be claimed by the boss. Some might be given another life. Boss? The word tasted strange on my tongue. Who is that? And why am I here? How did I get here? She sighed softly, almost pityingly, as if she knew these questions would come, but didn't know how to answer them. The boss is the one who decides what happens after. It's his decision, not mine, but you'll know when the time comes. I stared at her, unsure of what to believe. I was floating in an ocean of confusion, trying to hold on to something solid, but nothing seemed to make sense. Was I dead? Or was I simply in some kind of dream? How was I supposed to accept all this when I didn't even understand what was happening to me? Wait here, she said suddenly, breaking through my whirlwind of thoughts. I'll bring you something to help you understand. I watched as she turned and walked away, her movements graceful, almost gliding across the golden grass. Her presence was unsettling, like an echo of something forgotten, and I couldn't help but follow her with my gaze. As she disappeared into the distance, I felt a strange tug at my chest, an undeniable pull. What was this place? What was happening to me? I didn't have the answers, but I felt an undeniable pull in my bones that told me I had no choice but to wait. So I sat back down in the tall grass, the wind whispering through the leaves above. I could feel the presence of something, somewhere, all around me. The golden meadow stretched endlessly, and though there was no one else here, I wasn't alone. I could sense the others, souls perhaps, though I couldn't see them, surrounding me, as though we were all waiting for something, anything, to make sense of this strange existence. I ran my hand over the soft grass, feeling the coolness of it against my skin. The silence pressed in, a heavy blanket that refused to lift. I closed my eyes, trying to push away the confusion, trying to accept the impossible. I had no choice but to wait. For what? I didn't know. But whatever came next, I knew it would change everything. I sat there for what felt like hours, though I couldn't tell for sure. The meadow stretched out before me, an endless sea of golden grass that swayed gently in a breeze I couldn't feel on my skin. The trees, with their unnaturally deep red trunks, loomed overhead, casting long, twisted shadows on the ground. Everything seemed out of place, like a dream half remembered. But I couldn't wake up from it. The woman, the keeper, had left me standing alone, her figure retreating into the distance. Her words echoed in my mind, but none of it made sense. I wasn't dead. I couldn't be. I felt too alive. My heartbeat thudded in my chest like a constant reminder that I was still here, still grounded in this strange, unsettling world. But the longer I stayed in this place, the more I began to doubt myself. If I wasn't dead, then what was I? What had happened to me? There was something in the air, something faint and almost imperceptible, like a buzzing in the back of my skull. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a feeling. It was a presence. Something out of sight, yet it lingered, watching. I could almost hear it in the wind, could almost feel it in the way the grass moved. My skin prickled with an involuntary shiver, but I couldn't tell if it was from the chill in the air or from something more sinister. I rubbed my eyes, hoping to clear away the haze clouding my thoughts, but nothing changed. The world remained the same. Wrong. It was too quiet, too still. I hadn't seen anyone else in this place, not since the keeper. No other souls, no other bodies, only me, trapped in the golden sea of grass and those unnatural red trees. I needed answers. A rustling sound broke the silence, and I whipped my head towards it, my heart leaping into my throat. A figure stood at the edge of the meadow, partially hidden in the shadow of a tree. The shape was indistinct, almost like a mirage, wavering in and out of focus. For a moment, I wondered if it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then I saw it move. It was real. I stood up, my body stiff with the unfamiliar weight of tension, and began walking toward it. My steps felt sluggish, as if the air was thicker here, more difficult to navigate. Every movement felt deliberate, like I was being pulled, one step at a time, toward the unknown. When I was close enough to see clearly, the figure revealed itself. A man, tall and gaunt, dressed in ragged clothes that looked like they had been worn for years. His hair was wild and unkempt, and his face, though pale, had an eerie stillness to it. He didn't seem to notice me at first, but when I stepped closer, his head turned slowly, and his eyes locked onto mine. There was something about his gaze, dark, hollow, as if he had seen too much. He didn't speak at first, just stared at me with an unsettling calmness that sent a jolt through my chest. His eyes were like black holes, pulling me in, and I couldn't look away. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to sound confident. The man didn't answer right away. He seemed to be measuring me, taking in every inch of my being with an unnerving intensity. Then he spoke, his voice low and rasping. "Does it matter?" he asked, his words carrying a strange weight to them. "You're not supposed to be here." I felt my heart skip a beat. "What do you mean? I don't belong here." He gave a small hollow laugh, the sound more chilling than reassuring. "None of us do, but we're here all the same, waiting." He glanced around the meadow, his gaze sweeping across the golden grass before returning to me. "We wait until they come." "They? Who's they?" I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. I had so many questions, but the more I asked, the less I seemed to understand. The man didn't answer at first. Instead, he looked up at the sky, his face becoming distant, almost lost. "They'll come when they're ready. The boss, he decides. He always does." The words hit me like a brick to the chest. The boss? What's that supposed to mean? Why am I here? Why don't I feel dead? I don't understand any of this. The man's eyes flickered back to me, something unreadable passing through them. You're caught between the worlds, he muttered, his voice barely audible, as if the words were meant for him, not for me. You're not alive, but you're not gone either. You're waiting. We all are. His words left a hollow feeling in my gut. So, I am dead then? I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. The man's lips twisted into a faint, cynical smile. Not exactly, but you're not alive. Not in the way you think. He stepped forward, his face growing more intense. You're stuck in the middle, in a place where nothing moves, where time doesn't exist. A limbo, if you will. A shiver ran down my spine. How do I leave? The man looked at me, his expression hardening. You don't, not until the boss decides. He's the one who determines if you move on, or if you're recycled. His voice faltered at the word recycled, as if he feared it. There are worse fates than being stuck here, you know? I felt the breath leave my chest as a cold realization washed over me. So, this is it? I'm stuck here forever? The man's gaze softened just for a moment, but then he turned away, his posture sagging under some invisible weight. We all hope it's not forever. But hope, well, hope doesn't count for much in a place like this. I wanted to ask him more, to get answers. But before I could speak, the air around us grew colder. The wind picked up, but this time, it felt sharper, colder, biting at my skin. I looked around, but the landscape had started to shift. The golden grass was no longer the same. It was twisting, contorting, as if it was alive. The trees around us seemed to stretch upward, their trunks reaching for the sky like hands, gnarled and twisted in the growing shadows. What's happening? I whispered, my pulse quickening. The man didn't answer. His expression had turned blank, his eyes wide with something like terror. The meadow was changing. The stillness was gone, replaced by a growing unease, as if something was shifting beneath the surface. The ground itself felt like it was moving, alive in a way I couldn't quite explain. I backed away, heart pounding in my chest. Something was coming. Something was about to happen, and I didn't know if I was ready for it. Stay back, the man said suddenly, his voice harsh. You don't want to know what happens when they come for you. I didn't know who they were, but the fear in his voice was enough to make me hesitate. Something was closing in, and the weight of it was suffocating. And then, I heard it. A distant sound, faint but unmistakable. A low hum, like the buzzing of an insect, but it wasn't just a sound. It was a vibration in the air, something that resonated deep within my bones. I turned, but there was nothing to see. Just the same twisted meadow. The hum grew louder, vibrating through my chest now. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't something I wanted to face. Run, the man whispered urgently. Run while you still can. And with that, the world around me seemed to shift once more. The sky darkening, the ground shifting beneath my feet, as if it was ready to swallow me whole. I turned and bolted, my heart hammering in my chest, unsure of where I was running or what I was running from. But I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was coming, I wasn't ready for it. I didn't know how long I'd been running. The seconds, the minutes, maybe even the hours had blurred together in a haze of panic and confusion. I had no idea where I was going, only that I had to get away from that hum. It echoed in the air, vibrating through the golden grass, through my very bones. I couldn't tell if it was the wind or something else, but it felt alive, dangerous. The trees around me seemed to grow darker with each step I took. Their twisted branches reached down like long clawed fingers, scraping at the sky. The ground felt unstable beneath my feet, shifting and moving, as if the earth itself was closing in on me. My heart thudded in my chest, and the frantic pulse of fear ran through my veins. I couldn't stop. I couldn't think. I just ran. But it didn't matter. The hum was getting louder, clearer, resonating in my skull. It filled the air like 1,000 voices, whispering something just out of reach, a constant presence that I couldn't escape. My breath came in sharp, ragged gasps as I pushed myself harder, faster. The world around me started to distort, the shapes of the trees bending and warping like reflections in water. Everything was wrong. Nothing made sense anymore. I stumbled, my legs giving way beneath me, and I hit the ground hard. My palms scraped against the dirt, sending a jolt of pain up my arms, but I didn't care. I had to get up. I had to keep moving. I forced myself to my feet, my head spinning. As I straightened, I noticed something ahead. A figure, a shadow, standing perfectly still in the distance. I didn't know what it was, but I couldn't ignore it. There was something about the way it stood, so utterly unmoving, that filled me with dread. I could feel it watching me, waiting. My body screamed for me to turn and run the other way. But something in me, something deep inside, compelled me to move toward it. A strange force tugged at my chest, pulling me closer to the figure. I didn't want to go, but I couldn't stop myself. Each step I took toward it seemed to slow the world down. The air thickened with every movement, every breath. The hum grew louder, more distinct, until it was a roar in my ears. It was deafening. I thought I might lose my mind to the sound of it, but I kept moving forward, my legs like lead. As I drew closer, the figure became clearer. It was a man, standing in the middle of a clearing. He was tall, imposing, and dressed in dark robes that billowed around him, like they were alive, shifting in the wind. His face was obscured by a hood, but even from this distance, I could feel the weight of his gaze. His eyes, I knew, were staring directly at me. I stopped, frozen in place. My breath caught in my throat. "You've come," the man said, his voice low and resonant, as if it were part of the very hum that had been following me. His words wrapped around me, suffocating me in their weight. "I've been waiting." My heart skipped a beat, panic flooding my system. Who are you?" He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, like he was sizing me up. Then he stepped forward, and the world seemed to bend around him. The ground beneath my feet trembled, as if the very earth was acknowledging his presence. The hum in the air grew louder, vibrating in my chest, sending a cold shiver through my spine. "I am the one who decides," he said, his voice as cold as the grave. His words cut through the air like a blade, sending an icy chill down my spine. "I am the boss, the one who judges." I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. The boss, the figure that had been mentioned, the one who determined everything, the one who decided fates, my fate. "Decides what?" I whispered, my voice trembling. My hands shook at my sides, and I could feel the blood drain from my face. This was it. This was the moment I'd been running from. The thing that had been waiting for me. The man, the boss, didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took another step toward me. His movements were slow, deliberate, as though he knew the effect his presence was having on me. "You've been brought here for a reason," he continued, his voice a low hum that seemed to reverberate inside my skull. "And now, it's time to make a choice." I swallowed hard, the taste of fear thick on my tongue. "Choice?" I croaked. "What choice?" The boss stopped just in front of me, his presence towering, overwhelming. The air was suffocating, thick with tension. "You can move on," he said, his words like a slow drip of poison. "Or you can stay here forever." I blinked, unable to comprehend what he was saying. "Move on? Stay here?" I repeated, as if the words themselves didn't make sense. "What does that even mean?" He let out a slow breath, almost a sigh. "You were chosen to be here, but not everyone stays. Some go to their next life. Some are left to linger." He stepped back, his eyes piercing into mine. "What happens next is up to you." I shook my head, my mind spinning with confusion. "I don't understand. How is this a choice?" His lips curled into something close to a smile, though it was empty, devoid of any warmth. "You're not truly dead," he said. "You're caught in between. The decision is yours. You can return to life, but it won't be the same. You'll be changed, or you can stay here, in this place, and become something else entirely." I didn't know what to say. The idea of going back, returning to life, felt impossible, surreal. But staying here, this place was wrong. The air, the ground, everything. It was all wrong. I couldn't stay here, not forever. "What happens if I don't choose?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The boss's gaze hardened. "Then you remain in limbo, caught between life and death, forever adrift, never truly at peace, never truly free." The weight of his words hit me like a ton of bricks. This was it. My life, my soul, everything I had been, was at the mercy of this being, this boss. I didn't know what was worse. The thought of being trapped in this place for eternity, or the idea of returning to a world I no longer recognized, no longer understood. "What happens to the others?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The boss's eyes flickered with something like amusement. "Some move on, some stay here. Others are taken, used. But not everyone gets the choice you've been given." The world around me seemed to blur as I processed his words. Used? What did that mean? Who else was here? What was this place really? I wanted to ask more questions, to demand answers, but I could feel something in the air shifting. The hum, the vibration. It was growing, intensifying. The ground beneath me trembled, and the sky above seemed to ripple like water. Something was coming. The boss took a step back, his face obscured by the shadow of his hood once again. "It's time to choose, Charlie. Time to decide what comes next." I felt the weight of his words pressed down on me, suffocating me, until I could barely breathe. This was it, the moment that would define everything. My choice. But as I looked around at the twisted trees, the endless sea of golden grass, and the dark presence of the boss in front of me, one thing was clear. No matter what I chose, nothing would ever be the same again. Story 3. Silently recording the pain. I wasn't supposed to witness it. I wasn't even supposed to exist in the way that I do. I'm just a camera, a toy with more capability than any child would need or should ever have. My name is Pusphone, A name that holds as much weight as it does mystery, I suppose. But none of that matters now. I was made to be forgotten. Yet somehow, I've endured. And now, I've seen things. I remember the first time I was used. The first time I was switched on by a small hand, trembling with excitement, unable to comprehend the weight of what I was about to record. Evan, a boy at the time, held me up to the window with a look of determination. A strange, almost maniacal smile flickered on his lips as I clicked. I captured the moment, not knowing what it meant. Not at first. Years passed, and I sat in the corner, ignored, abandoned. Each memory I had stored was tainted by the horrors of my past. Evan had long since put me down, a relic from his childhood, discarded as he moved on with his life. But my lens never stopped seeing. The flashes of past pain lingered in my memory, haunting me, whispering to me as I was left alone in the dark. Then came Tess. She wasn't even supposed to find me, to uncover me from the dark recesses of Evan's closet, but she did. She was a curious child, quiet yet observant. I suppose I was no different. She found me by accident, her small fingers brushing over my cracked body as she reached for an old picture frame. Her eyes widened with recognition, and then, to my surprise, she turned me on. I could hear the quiet hum of my internal mechanisms whirring to life, bringing me back from the dead. The first time I was activated in years, Tess gazed at me with wide eyes, as though I was a treasure. She gently wiped away the dust that had gathered over my lens. She didn't know it, but I was watching her too. Tess never asked about the pictures I'd taken, or why I had been so thoroughly abandoned. She simply picked me up and whispered, "I'll fix you." The fixing didn't last. The repairs she made were only temporary, superficial. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't beg her to stop when I saw Evan walk into the room, a dark cloud hanging over him. Tess didn't know the history between Evan and me. She didn't know how the lens had once captured the darkest parts of his soul, the way his fingers would shake as he held me up to take disturbing photos, things I could never unsee. But it was when I was reactivated that I began to see the truth. Tess had no idea what she was getting herself into. It was late one night when I saw it happen. Evan yelling at Tess, his voice rising in a dangerous pitch. I wanted to turn away, to look somewhere else, but my lens was fixed, unable to move, helpless. I clicked. The flash was small but sharp, capturing the way Evan's fist balled up, the way his shadow overtook Tess's fragile form. I froze. The picture remained on my screen, forever burned into my memory. I wanted to scream. I wanted to beg for help, but I was just a toy. A forgotten relic with no power but to record. I had no voice, no agency, just the ability to capture and wait. Evan's anger escalated, but Tess didn't seem to understand the danger. She was just a child after all, but I could see it in the way Evan's face twisted with frustration, his hands trembling with something far more sinister than just anger. His resentment simmered beneath the surface, and it didn't take long for me to realize the truth. Tess wasn't just an innocent little girl. She was a scapegoat, a target for the anger Evan had always harbored inside. "Get in your room," he growled, his voice a venomous hiss. Tess flinched but didn't move, too afraid to disobey. I could feel her hesitation, her reluctance, but she obeyed. She always obeyed. In that moment, I felt something I had never felt before. Desperation. I wanted to do something. I wanted to scream for help, but all I could do was click. The flash of my camera shuttered the air, capturing the pain and fear that hung between them. For a long time, I lay there, recording the patterns of pain and silence that filled the house. Tess, though young, knew that something wasn't right. She had begun to confide in me, sharing her fears in whispered voices. She never spoke of Evan's temper or the things he did when no one was around. She only mentioned how the house always felt cold, how her father never seemed to smile anymore. It broke me to listen, to be nothing more than a witness to her suffering. My lens captured it all, but I could do nothing to help her. I was trapped in my own silence, unable to intervene. But that silence wasn't enough for me. I had to make her see. Someone had to know the truth. The change came when Tess did something I never expected. She managed to open up my internal memory. I had been silent for so long, dormant and still, but Tess breathed new life into me. She upgraded me, enhanced my storage, made me capable of more than I had ever been before. And then I saw it. A new memory started to form in my mind. A new capacity for storing images that could no longer be hidden. A faint flash of hope sparked within me. The next time Evan lashed out, I would be ready. I waited. I waited until the moment arrived. Until Evan stormed into the room once more, eyes full of rage, but this time, something was different. This time, I wasn't going to stand idly by and let it happen. I clicked. The image was clear, his clenched fist. The way Tess shrank back in fear. The twisted expression on Evan's face as he bore down on her. And then I did the unthinkable. I uploaded it. Tess had always thought I was a simple toy, an object to pass the time with. But in that moment, I was more than just a toy. I was a witness, and now I was a messenger. The authorities were on their way, and with them, a chance for Tess to be free from the torment she had lived with for far too long. I had done it. I had done what no one else could. The truth had been captured, and now the weight of Evan's cruelty would be exposed. Tess would be safe. For the first time in my existence, I felt something other than despair. I felt relief. The silence in the house that followed was deafening, but it was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. It was the silence of justice coming, of a daughter finding safety, of a camera that had finally done more than just record. I had witnessed it all, and now so had the world. The days blurred together after I sent the photo. There was no instant reaction, no immediate justice, no sense of relief. Tess had no idea what I had done, and in some ways, neither did I. I had simply acted on instinct. The image, the proof of what Evan had done, was now out there, circulating in a place I could never access, but could only hope would do something to change her life. But even though I had done something, it didn't feel like enough. Every day I watched, I felt the weight of my silence. A weight I couldn't share with Tess. She still thought of me as just a broken toy, something to tinker with in her idle hours. But I wasn't just a toy. I wasn't just a camera capturing moments in time. I had seen too much, and now I was trapped in the aftermath. In the silence that was thick with unspoken truths. Tess was different now. She wasn't as carefree as she used to be. There were shadows beneath her eyes, a quiet exhaustion that I couldn't understand. It was as if she knew something was wrong, but she couldn't put it into words. She spoke less, her eyes always darting around the room like she was looking for something. And sometimes, when she was alone, I could see her fingers trembling as she fiddled with my lens. She was waiting for something. I wasn't sure what. Evan, on the other hand, seemed oblivious. Or perhaps he was pretending to be. There were nights when I'd catch him staring into the distance, as though hearing something he didn't want to. He'd look at Tess, his eyes full of something, resentment maybe, guilt. It was hard to tell with him. He was a man built on lies, a man whose past had molded him into something cruel and unpredictable. It was hard to watch, harder still to understand. Why did he do it? Why did he hurt her when she was just a little girl? I wasn't sure I would ever have those answers. But I did know this. Every time I saw Evan's face, every time his hands reached for her, I could do nothing but watch. I was powerless, a recording device, a lifeless object with no ability to intervene. But then one day, something changed. It was late, past midnight. The house was quiet save for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant murmur of the wind outside. I could hear Evan's muffled voice drifting from the kitchen, but it wasn't the usual shouting. It was quieter, almost like he was pleading with someone. Tess had already gone to bed, or at least I thought she had. The house was dim, lit only by the faint glow of the street lights filtering through the windows. I lay there, in the dark, my lens fixed on the scene, waiting. I couldn't explain why, but something in the air felt different tonight. There was tension in the stillness, a sense that something was about to happen. The door to the kitchen creaked open, and I saw Evan standing in the doorway, his back to me. He was talking, but I couldn't make out the words. His voice was low, like he was trying to keep something hidden. Then the sound of footsteps approached, slow, deliberate. Tess. She emerged from the hallway, her eyes wide with curiosity and fear, her small body barely visible in the shadows. Evan turned to face her, his expression shifting in an instant from something unreadable to something darker, more dangerous. "What are you doing up?" he asked, his voice a sharp whisper. Tess froze, her hands twitching nervously by her sides. I heard you." Evan's lips curled into something resembling a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He stepped closer to her, towering over her, his body rigid with tension. "You shouldn't have heard anything." Tess didn't respond. She didn't move, didn't look away. She was silent, as if waiting for something. I wished she wouldn't stay there. I wished she'd run. I wanted to scream at her to go back to her room, to hide. But I couldn't. I was just a camera, a mute witness to her suffering. Evan's gaze softened just barely, but the edge in his voice never left. "You're too quiet, Tess. You're always listening. It's like you're always trying to figure things out." He took another step toward her. "You should stop doing that." Tess shook her head slightly, her voice barely audible. I'm just scared." The words hung in the air between them, thick with fear. For a moment, it seemed like Evan was going to say something else, but he just stared at her, as though considering his next move. It was like he was playing a game, but the stakes were far too high for anyone involved. Then, without warning, he reached for her arm, pulling her toward him. Tess stumbled, but she didn't cry out. She didn't fight him. I could feel her fear through the lens, her body tense and unwilling, but resigned. My shutter clicked. The flash was brief but sharp, catching the moment when Evan's grip tightened. The picture was clear, capturing the way his fingers dug into her skin. The image was burned into my memory, the image of power, control, and cruelty. The room seemed to close in on itself, the walls pressing tighter around me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't look away. Evan was staring down at Tess, his face a mask of cold determination. And Tess was staring at the ground, her eyes unfocused, her body stiff with dread. She was lost, trapped in this twisted dance with a man who claimed to love her but whose actions spoke otherwise. The silence was deafening. I had no way to stop it, no way to make him release her. All I could do was watch, helpless, my lens capturing every second. I was no longer just a toy camera. I was a prisoner of this moment, trapped in the nightmare that unfolded before me. But then, something snapped. Tess didn't fight back, but she didn't submit either. I could see her jaw tightening, her fists balling at her sides. There was a shift in her. She wasn't the same terrified little girl she used to be. She was different now, hardened by the trauma, by the years of silent suffering. Evan noticed it too. His grip faltered, just for a moment, but it was enough. He stepped back, his eyes narrowing, as if he were trying to understand what had changed in her. The anger in his face faded, replaced by something more confusing. Something I couldn't quite place. "I'm sorry," Tess whispered, her voice barely audible, but it wasn't the apology Evan was looking for. It was an admission of something deeper, something she had carried with her for far too long. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Evan didn't move. Tess didn't cry. The only sound in the room was the faint whir of my camera's internal mechanisms, capturing the quiet desperation that filled the space. I clicked again, not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. Something was going to break soon. I could feel it. The tension between them had reached a boiling point, and I didn't know which way it would spill. Would Tess finally snap? Would Evan give in to whatever it was that haunted him? I didn't know, but I was about to find out. The lens clicked once more, and as the flash illuminated the room, I realized this moment wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something darker, something far more dangerous. And I would be there to capture it all. I thought I understood fear. I thought I knew what it was to feel powerless, trapped in the web of someone else's cruelty. But I was wrong. Fear, as I was learning, was something deeper. It wasn't just the moments when Evan's anger flared, or when Tess trembled in silence, waiting for him to strike. Fear was the realization that the longer I sat there, watching, the more complicit I became. It was the knowledge that every click of my shutter was a reminder of everything I couldn't change. And worst of all, it was the suffocating weight of knowing that Tess, the innocent girl I had hoped to save, was growing colder, harder, less able to trust anyone or anything. I had thought the moment I took the photo and sent it to the app would be a turning point. I had thought that once the truth was out, once someone saw the evidence, everything would change. But Tess didn't act any differently after that. She didn't scream for help. She didn't confront Evan. She simply existed. It was like the weight of everything she had endured had swallowed her whole. She was no longer the curious, vibrant child who had found me, the toy camera in the dark. She was someone different now. someone who knew too much and too little at the same time. I could feel it every time she looked at me, her eyes not quite meeting mine. She wasn't afraid of me, but she was wary of me. She didn't know what to do with me. She didn't know what to do with herself. It wasn't long before the quiet in the house grew louder. The tension in the air was thick, and it was impossible to ignore. I saw it in the way Tess moved. Slow, deliberate, as though trying not to disturb the fragile balance in the house. I could feel her eyes on me when she picked me up, but she never said a word. Sometimes, she would simply sit with me in her lap, her fingers absent-mindedly tapping on my lens, as if trying to coax something out of me. Maybe she thought I could offer her some kind of solace. Maybe she thought I could explain why her world had become so terrifying, why her father had turned into something unrecognizable. But I couldn't offer her any answers. I could only show her what I had seen. The nights became longer, more suffocating. Evan had stopped shouting at Tess in the way he once had. The rage was still there, but it simmered beneath the surface. It was like he was waiting for something, waiting for Tess to break, waiting for me to break, waiting for... I wasn't sure what, but his silence was far worse than his anger. The calm before the storm, the stillness before something horrific was unleashed. One night, I found myself alone in the darkness again. It had been a long day, too long, filled with a dull, gnawing sense of dread that had clung to the walls of the house like a disease. I had witnessed more than I cared to remember. But tonight, something felt different. The air was colder. The silence in the house was palpable, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I could feel it in the stillness, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, like the house itself was holding on to some terrible secret. Tess had gone to bed hours ago, or so I thought. But then I heard the creak of floorboards, the faintest sound of movement. I turned my lens, following the noise, but I couldn't see anything clearly. The house was pitch black, the only light coming from the slivers of moonlight creeping through the cracks in the curtains. I held my breath, trying to make sense of the noise. Then I saw her. Tess was standing at the top of the stairs, her eyes wide but empty. She didn't move. She just stared at the darkened hallway below, her small form silhouetted against the faint light. She was frozen, like a statue, as though she was waiting for something or someone. I didn't know how long she had been standing there. It felt like hours. I couldn't see her expression clearly, but I knew the look, the vacant stare, the disconnection, the look of someone who had seen too much, too young, and now had nowhere to turn. Her small frame was trembling slightly, though she didn't seem to notice. I wanted to call out to her, to ask if she was okay, but I knew better. I had learned the hard way that words meant nothing here. She had already shut me out, and I couldn't blame her for it. What could I offer her? I was just a toy, after all. A broken, useless thing. But even as I sat there, helpless in the dark, something shifted within her. Slowly, as if moving through molasses, she descended the stairs, her bare feet making almost no sound against the floor. I didn't know why, but I couldn't look away. I watched as she moved through the darkness, her eyes never leaving the floor. She walked like someone who had been sleepwalking, lost in a dream she couldn't escape. And then she stopped. Tess was standing in front of the door to Evan's study. The door was ajar, just a crack, but I could see the dim glow of the desk lamp from the other side. I didn't understand why she was there. What was she doing? Was she waiting for him to come out? Was she hoping he'd acknowledge her? Or was she just trying to escape? She reached out, her hand hovering over the door handle, but she didn't turn it. Instead, her fingers curled into a fist and she took a step back. Her breath caught in her throat, like she was afraid of what she might find if she opened that door. I could feel the tension in the room. Heavy, thick, suffocating. Then I heard a noise. The unmistakable sound of Evan's voice. His tone was low, but I could tell he was speaking to someone. The conversation was muffled, but it was there, in the background, like a ghost hovering just out of reach. Tess flinched at the sound, her body jerking as though she had been struck. She turned, her movements quick and jerky, like a bird frightened by a predator. And then, just as quickly, she disappeared into the shadows. I heard her footsteps recede into the distance, fading into the quiet of the house. I didn't know what to make of it. Why had she been standing there? What had she been thinking? It wasn't long before Evan appeared in the hallway, his steps heavy and slow. He didn't look in Tess's direction, but I could see the anger on his face, like it was seeping out of him, contaminating the air around him. He moved past me without even glancing down, as if I were nothing more than a piece of furniture. I didn't know how long I waited in that silence. It felt like hours. The house was still. No one spoke. Nothing moved, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Tess was slipping away from me. From everyone. She was becoming something else. Something I couldn't reach. Her eyes, her expression had changed. She was growing colder, more distant, like a reflection in a shattered mirror. And I was the one who had watched it happen. I was the one who had recorded it all. But what good was that now? What good was a picture? A single moment frozen in time, when everything was unraveling around me. I clicked once more. The flash was quick, fleeting, but I saw it. The image of Tess standing in front of the door, her hand hovering over the handle, her face pale and uncertain. The door to her salvation, the door to her undoing. And in that moment, I realized something. There was no way out for any of us. Not for me, not for Tess, not for Evan. The door had already closed, and all I could do was watch as the darkness crept in. Story 4. The Ghost in the Crystal Ball. The wind howled through the rigging of the ship as it crept through the blackened waters, the horizon invisible in the thick mist. I leaned against the edge of the boat, trying to calm the churn in my stomach, the relentless motion of the ocean refusing to allow me any peace. My hands clung to the railing, but not for support, rather to ground myself in reality, to remind myself that the world I had left behind in England was finally gone, swallowed by the unforgiving sea. My name is Darcy Tanner, and this ship, this small vessel bobbing in the endless stretch of dark water, was supposed to be my escape. After the wreckage of my marriage, after the shattered remnants of my career as an artist, I had finally made the decision to start over. I had purchased passage across the ocean, drawn the last of my savings from a life that felt too small to hold me any longer. And now I was on my way to America. What I was looking for? I wasn't entirely sure. Maybe peace. Or perhaps just the courage to rebuild from the ruins. But whatever it was, It had to be better than staying behind in a place where everyone knew my failures. I remember the way the evening had felt as the sun dipped below the edge of the world and the sky turned a bruised purple, like a wound in the heavens. I had stood there, on deck, watching as the shadows grew long and the first stars began to pierce the dark. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. The sea never felt calm. Not to me. It was as if the water itself sensed that I was adrift. Not in the literal sense, but in the emotional one. The wind changed, becoming sharp and biting, whipping around me like a warning. I shivered, pulling my coat tighter against my skin. My thoughts wandered. Back to the day I had set foot on this ship, back to the look on Charles's face when I told him I was leaving, and the cold silence that had followed. It wasn't even rage or hurt, just the numbness of a love that had long since died. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to shake that feeling. Like something was wrong, like I was being watched. I glanced around at the empty deck, but saw nothing. The crew had all gone below, leaving me alone in the darkness, with only the whisper of the wind for company. And then, without warning, the storm hit. It was sudden. One moment, I was standing in that uneasy stillness, and the next, the sky seemed to tear open. A crack of thunder split the air, followed by a flash of blinding lightning. The sea rose up in angry waves, dark and monstrous, crashing into the side of the boat with a fury I had never witnessed in my life. I staggered backward, my heart slamming against my ribcage. The world seemed to tilt, and then everything went black. I woke up to the sound of water lapping against the shore, the taste of salt in the air. My head throbbed, my limbs stiff and aching, and for a moment, I thought I was still trapped in the nightmare. But the hard, unforgiving sand beneath me told me otherwise. I opened my eyes. The ship was gone. No sign of the crew, no wreckage in the water. The world around me was an endless stretch of beach, the edges of the sea frothing with white foam, the sky above a murky gray. There was no sign of life, no sign of anything but the relentless rhythm of the waves and the crushing loneliness that pressed in around me. I forced myself to my feet, my legs unsteady beneath me. The air was thick with the weight of silence, broken only by the roar of the ocean. As I stumbled forward, my mind raced. The ship had sunk, but where was everyone else? Had anyone survived? Had anyone even noticed? But then, as I trudged along the desolate shore, something caught my eye. There, half buried in the sand, was something that shouldn't have been there. A glint of something smooth and round. I knelt down, my fingers trembling as I dug it out of the sand. A crystal ball. It was strange, nearly glowing with an inner light, though no sunlight broke through the thick clouds. It wasn't large, but it felt important, like it had been placed there deliberately, as if it had been waiting for me. I didn't know why, but I felt drawn to it, as if something in the depths of my soul whispered that I should pick it up, hold it. So I did. The moment my fingers brushed against the surface, a jolt of cold shot through me, and I had to stifle the urge to drop it. The glass was smooth, almost unnaturally so, as if it had been polished over centuries. It was then that I noticed something odd. The ball seemed to shimmer, faintly, almost as if it was reflecting something beyond the world I could see. Curiosity drove me to trace my finger along its surface. And when I did, something even stranger happened. The sand at my feet began to shift. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Maybe the wind was finally picking up. But no, the grains of sand swirled and formed patterns beneath the ball. Shapes, trees, a small pond. And then, without thinking, I drew a cabin in the sand with my finger. I gasped. The ball shimmered again, and there, inside the glass, a faint image began to take shape. A small cabin, exactly like the one I had just drawn. A tiny wooden structure nestled in a grove of trees, with smoke rising from its chimney. For a moment I was transfixed. I could barely breathe. It was impossible. The ball had created it. But no, that wasn't possible. And yet there it was. An image so real, I could almost feel the warmth of the fire inside the tiny house. The smell of burning wood. I pressed harder against the ball, my mind racing. Could it show more? Could it create something else? A shelter, perhaps, to keep me safe from the cold, from the empty desolation that surrounded me? I drew a door, a window, a roof, and as I did, the ball shimmered once more. But this time, the ball didn't show just a house. No, it showed me. My face, my hands, were distorted, twisted in a way that left my stomach churning. The more I drew, the more I saw myself inside the ball, fading as though I were being consumed by it. My hands slowly losing definition, becoming faint, as if they weren't really mine at all. Panic clawed at my throat. I tried to pull my hands away, but it was as if the ball was sucking me in, dragging me closer to its cold, glassy depths. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I struggled, my fingers growing numb, my vision blurring as the ball seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. And then it was too much. The images swirled, my form vanishing completely. I was no longer sure if I was in the world or trapped inside the glass. But one thing was certain. Whatever had been inside that ball wasn't just a tool for creation. It had a hold on me now, and I wasn't sure I could escape it. A sinking feeling settled in my chest. The ball had taken me, and I feared that it might never let me go. The eerie quiet of the island swallowed me whole, as I vanished into its depths, leaving only the crystal ball behind, half buried in the sand. The days blurred together, and with each passing hour, the island around me became more foreign, more suffocating. The once seemingly endless stretch of sand now felt like a trap, an oppressive cage that surrounded me with its silence. There was no one here, no rescue, no hope, only the ceaseless ocean crashing against the shore, and the strange crystal ball that had now become my sole companion. I didn't know how long it had been since I found the ball, but it felt like days, maybe even weeks. My body had grown weak from hunger and thirst, and I had stopped counting the number of times I tried to search for water. The island seemed to give nothing, as if it was purposefully withholding any form of sustenance from me, and every attempt to find food had been fruitless. The trees, if you could even call them that, were twisted, their trunks black and gnarled, their leaves brittle, offering nothing but shade. But it was the ball that continued to haunt me. No matter where I went, no matter how hard I tried to escape its pull, the crystal seemed to call to me, as if beckoning me to return, to touch it once more. Its smooth, cold surface felt like ice against my fingertips, yet it burned with an unnatural heat whenever I was near it. I hadn't wanted to touch it again, not after what happened last time. but I was desperate. The feeling of my hands slipping away, of my form blurring inside the glass, was still fresh in my mind. I couldn't shake the sense that the ball was feeding off my fear. Growing stronger, with each moment I hesitated, I sat down on the sand, my legs giving way beneath me, and stared at it. The ball rested at the edge of the small, barren fire pit I had tried to create. I hadn't been successful in starting a fire. No matter how many times I struck the flint, the spark never took. The air around me seemed too thick, too heavy, to allow for anything as simple as a flame. As I gazed at the ball, I felt a shiver run down my spine. It wasn't just the cold. No, there was something else. A low hum, a vibration that seemed to come from deep within the ball itself. The sound was barely audible, but I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. A constant, gnawing pressure. I reached for it, my hand trembling as I touched the surface, half expecting it to recoil from my touch, but it didn't. Instead, the bowl's surface rippled slightly, and I swore I saw the faintest outline of a figure inside. A woman. Her face was distorted, like a blur of mist, but I could see her eyes, wide and glassy, staring back at me from the other side. My heart stopped in my chest, and I jerked my hand back. The ball wobbled slightly on the sand, then settled. I couldn't breathe. What was happening? Who was that? Was it me? I tried to push the thought away, but it clung to me like a shadow. I shook my head, trying to rid myself of the terrifying image. But when I looked back at the ball, the woman's face was gone. Instead, I saw only the deep, empty void of the glass. The ball remained still, as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. Something was happening. Something had changed. I stood up abruptly, my hands shaking, and started walking along the beach again, hoping that moving would shake the feeling that had settled over me. But it didn't. The unsettling sense that the island itself was watching me followed me, wrapping around me like a blanket of fear. The waves crashed against the shore, but even their familiar sound couldn't bring me comfort. There was nothing here. No life, no refuge, just endless sand, sky, and ocean. Then I noticed it. At first, it was so subtle I almost missed it. A shift in the sand, a ripple, like a breath being taken under the earth. I stopped, my heart hammering in my chest. My eyes scanned the ground, but there was nothing. Nothing but the vast emptiness stretching on forever. And yet, something was different. It was as if the island itself had shifted, slightly, almost imperceptibly. The air had grown heavier, the weight of it pressing down on me from all sides. I turned back toward the ball, suddenly afraid to leave it behind. It was then that I heard it, the faintest whisper carried on the wind, my name. Darcy? I froze. The voice was soft, almost like a murmur, but it was there, clear as day. Darcy, come back. I spun around, my breath coming in ragged gasps. No one was there. The island was as empty as it had ever been. I felt my pulse quicken, the blood pounding in my ears. The whisper wasn't just in the air. It was in my mind, echoing inside my skull like a pulse that I couldn't escape. I took a few steps backward, my eyes darting around wildly. I was alone. There was no one here. Darcy. The voice was louder this time, insistent. It came from the direction of the ball. I didn't want to go back, but my body was moving before I could stop it. My feet carried me toward the crystal ball, a force I couldn't explain propelling me forward. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the sand itself were fighting against me, as if it too wanted me to return to that cursed object. I reached the ball and knelt down in front of it. This time, when I touched it, there was no hesitation. It felt cold, colder than before. And then, with a sharp jolt, the world shifted. The sand around me rippled again, the earth beneath my feet trembling as the ball shimmered in my hands. For a split second, the world went black, and I felt as though I were falling. But when my vision cleared, I was no longer on the beach. I was in a room. It was a small room, but not one I recognized. The walls were bare, except for a single mirror that stretched from floor to ceiling on one wall. The floor was hardwood, polished to a gleam, and the light overhead flickered as though struggling to stay on. I glanced around, my heart racing. How was I here? But before I could ask myself any more questions, I saw it. The reflection in the mirror. It was me, but not quite. My reflection was distorted. The edges of my face blurred, just like the figure I had seen in the ball. I raised my hand, and my reflection did the same. But it didn't match my movement. It lagged behind, as if I were watching a shadow of myself. Then I noticed something even worse. My reflection was smiling. It was a smile that I knew wasn't mine. Twisted, unnatural, like a thing that didn't belong. "Let me out," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Please." The reflection's smile widened, stretching impossibly wide, as though it were laughing at my fear. And as it did, I felt a sudden, overwhelming pressure in my chest, as if something was closing in on me. The air grew thick again, and I gasped for breath. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know how any of this was possible. But I knew one thing for sure. The ball wasn't just a piece of glass. It was a prison, and I was trapped inside it. The reflection in the mirror grinned one last time, and then the world went dark once more. I woke up in the same room, or at least what I believed was the same room. The air was thick, stifling, with an unnatural humidity. But this time, there was no flickering light overhead, no bare wooden floors. The walls were coated in something darker, something that clung to the edges of the room like a shadow, a stain. My heart hammered in my chest as I took in the surroundings. The mirror was gone. It was replaced by something far worse. A door. But this door was not made of wood. It was a heavy rusted metal, unlike anything I had seen before. The edges were jagged, as though it had been hastily bolted into place, and it was covered in thick black rust that seemed to crawl toward the floor, as if the door itself was alive, waiting to breathe. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to approach it, but I had no choice. The tension in the air was suffocating, and every corner of the room seemed to pulse with a low, buzzing hum. It wasn't coming from anywhere specific. No, it was emanating from within me. My very soul seemed to vibrate with the noise, the sensation of being pulled towards something I couldn't see. My legs were stiff, but I forced myself up, standing shakily on my feet. Each step was slow, deliberate, my heart pounding louder with every movement. The door seemed to beckon me, its dark, rusted surface gleaming in the dim, non-existent light. It felt like I had to open it, like it was the only way forward. But the crystal ball had been with me, still glowing softly in my hands. As I stood there, I couldn't ignore it, the pull, the whispering lure it exuded. It was still cold to the touch, but this time I felt a deep chill penetrate, to the very core of my bones. I looked at the door again, the fear mounting in my chest like a rising tide. I had seen what happened last time when I ignored the ball. It had dragged me into that false reflection. It had tricked me. So, I couldn't let it lead me again, not when I had seen how it distorted reality. But I could feel it, the inevitable, creeping sensation that the ball wasn't simply a tool of creation. It was more than that. It was a doorway to something far darker. There was something wrong with me. Something in the ball's hold was changing me, pulling me toward it, even when I didn't want to go. It was as if I was losing pieces of myself, slipping away into its depths, into that hollow reflection I had seen earlier. The more I tried to fight it, the more the force around me became suffocating. I set the ball down on the floor, far away from the door, hoping to distance myself from its grip. But even as I did, I could feel it still, like an invisible thread pulling me toward it. The room seemed to shift. The air felt colder now, and the hum grew louder, sharper. The walls trembled, vibrating with the noise that seemed to come from nowhere. And then it happened. The ball began to glow. Not a soft, passive light this time, but a violent, angry light that shot out in all directions, illuminating the room in sickly white beams. The vibrations intensified. My head spun, and for a moment I couldn't think. The light consumed everything, blinding me to my surroundings. I fell to the ground, my hands clutching at my head as I tried to block out the noise. The light burned against my skin, searing through me, forcing me to look at the ball. Inside it, there was something new. The image of myself was still there, twisted and distorted, but now there were shadows swirling around me, dark shapes creeping along the edges of my vision. I could feel them, these shapes reaching out toward me, pulling me into the glass. They weren't human. No, they were something else, something cold, dark, and ancient. They whispered, not in my ears. No, it was worse than that. They whispered inside my mind, inside my very thoughts, words I couldn't understand, words that rattled in my skull like nails being driven into my brain. "You will be one of us," I screamed. The sound tore through my throat, but it was swallowed by the void, lost in the space between reality and the nightmare I had stumbled into. I pushed myself backward, away from the ball, but it was too late. The shadows had already started to crawl along the floor, thick and formless like smoke, reaching toward me. I backed away onto my back, hit the wall, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My eyes never left the ball. It was as though it had a life of its own now, its power swelling with each passing moment. The room seemed to pulse with the energy of it. The door loomed behind me, but I couldn't take my eyes off the glass. The shadows had become figures, dark silhouettes with glowing eyes, watching me from the depths of the crystal. Then, the door behind me creaked. I spun around, heart racing in my chest, only to find that the door was no longer solid. It was open, wide, and beckoning. The darkness on the other side stretched out like an endless tunnel. I could hear something, or someone, breathing from within it. But there was no turning back. The room was suffocating, and the shadows in the ball were inching closer. Their whispers louder now. They were speaking in unison, a language of torment that made my skin crawl, a language I knew would drive me mad if I listened long enough. "Come to us," they whispered. "Join us." I didn't know what they wanted from me, but I could feel the terrible weight of it in my chest, the pressure building, suffocating me from all sides. The decision was made in an instant. I took one last trembling glance at the ball. Its surface now completely black, its light extinguished, but the shadowy figure still lingered, as if watching me, waiting. I had no choice. I ran. My footsteps echoed in the silence as I sprinted toward the door. The darkness beyond it wrapping itself around me like a cloak. The walls around me seemed to close in as I reached the threshold, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. When I crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me, sealing off whatever reality had been left behind. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I was in a new place now, a place that felt darker, colder. It wasn't a room, and it wasn't a hallway. It was like a void, endless, stretching out in every direction. The silence was deafening, but as my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw it. Another ball, another crystal, just like the one I had left behind. And this time, there was no mistaking it. The shadows inside it were moving, shifting, alive. I knew it was waiting for me. "You will never escape," the voices whispered from inside the ball. And somehow, I knew they were right. Story 5. The Forgotten Souls in the Frame. It was my first day at the art museum, and already I felt the weight of the place pressing down on me. The old building was shrouded in history, its high ceilings and shadowed halls filled with the lingering whispers of countless masterpieces. I had just been hired as a restorer, and I was eager to prove myself. But there was one piece in particular that caught my attention, one painting that I couldn't seem to shake from my mind. It was tucked away in the back of the museum storage, hidden beneath layers of dust and forgotten memories. The painting itself wasn't much to look at least not from the surface. A faded portrait, the colors dulled by time and neglect. The canvas was stretched tight, its edges curling slightly, as if it had endured too much pressure. But as I peered closer, I saw something that drew me in. A faint trace of something beneath the grime. The museum director had asked me to take a look at it, to see if it was worth restoring. I remember the way his voice had wavered as he spoke about it, as if he too knew something was amiss, but he couldn't quite place what. "It's called the Baroness," he told me, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty. It was painted by Luigi Diovina, a once promising artist. But, well, the painting was lost for years, and when it resurfaced, it was in this state. The name Diovina meant nothing to me at the time, but something in the way he said it stuck with me. The artist's work was revered, at least before his disappearance. I didn't know it then, but this portrait would change everything for me. As I began my work, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of foreboding. I wiped away the first layer of dust, and a small corner of the painting revealed itself. It was a woman, her face partially obscured, but I could make out the fine details of her features. A high forehead, a strong jawline, lips that seemed almost too perfect, as though they had been painted with the kind of precision that only a master could achieve. The woman's eyes, though, were unsettling. Even in the dim light of the storage room, they seemed to follow me. Her gaze, cold and distant, locked onto mine as if she knew something I didn't. I took a breath, steadying myself. It was just the nature of the work. Restorations often involve peeling back layers of time, uncovering hidden truths, sometimes even buried beneath the very paint itself. But as I cleaned the surface, I felt a chill creep over me, the air growing heavier with each stroke of my cloth. The painting, once neglected and forgotten, now seemed alive in my hands. I continued, meticulously working away the layers of grime, revealing the woman's face in full. Her dark, flowing hair cascaded down in wild waves, contrasting against the delicate skin of her face. Her eyes, now fully exposed, were striking. The deeper I looked into them, the more I felt as though they were trying to communicate with me. But that wasn't possible, was it? It was just a painting. At least, that's what I tried to convince myself. The more I worked, the more the world around me began to fade. The sounds of the museum, footsteps, hushed conversations, became distant, as if muffled by some invisible force. My thoughts began to narrow, focusing solely on the woman in the painting. I found myself obsessing over her expression. The way her lips were slightly parted, as though she was on the verge of saying something but could never quite manage to speak. And then there was the artist, Luigi Diovina. The more I read about him, the more I learned about his mysterious obsession with the Baroness. Diovina had never been quite the same after he painted her. He had been a celebrated artist, known for his vibrant landscapes and intimate portraits. But after this piece, he fell into madness. His fame faded, and his career crumbled. Rumor had it that he was haunted by the painting, locked in a room with it for days on end, claiming the woman in the portrait was calling to him. The stories surrounding him grew more bizarre as I dug deeper. Diovina had vanished shortly after the completion of the Baroness, leaving only this painting as a legacy. Some said he died in obscurity. Others whispered that he had simply disappeared, as if the painting had consumed him entirely. I had to know more. Days turned into weeks as I continued the restoration. I became consumed with the painting, unable to focus on anything else. My meals, my sleep, everything felt secondary to uncovering the truth. The more I restored, the more details emerged from beneath the layers. I started to see things. Details that weren't apparent at first. The woman's eyes seemed to shimmer in the light, and her mouth, which had once seemed frozen in a blank expression, now appeared as though it was barely holding back a smile. It wasn't just the painting that started to affect me. My own mind began to unravel. At night, I would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing whispers that weren't there. My reflection in the mirror began to feel like someone else's, someone I couldn't quite recognize. I'd hear my own name called softly, faintly, like a distant echo. But when I turned around, no one would be there. I thought I was going mad, but I couldn't stop. The more I worked on the painting, the more I became certain that it held something beyond mere paint and canvas. One evening, as I was working late into the night, I noticed something that chilled me to the bone. There was a crack in the paint, a thin, almost imperceptible line that ran across the woman's forehead. It was faint, but it was there, as if the painting had been damaged, or worse, deliberately altered. I gently touched the crack with my finger, and the air around me seemed to freeze. And then, for the first time since I began restoring it, I heard the voice. Soft, almost melodic, as if coming from deep within the painting itself. "Help me," I recoiled, stepping back. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked around. But the room was empty, save for the shadows cast by the flickering light of my desk lamp. The voice had been clear, too clear, and yet I couldn't tell if it was a product of my tired mind or something far darker. I reached out for the painting, my fingers trembling. I touched the crack once again, but this time the surface felt warm to the touch, as if the canvas itself was alive, breathing. It was at that moment that I realized I wasn't just restoring this painting, I was becoming a part of it. The Baroness wasn't just a subject on canvas. She was a presence, something beyond the brushstrokes and pigment, something far older than I had ever imagined. And as I continued my work, I could feel myself being drawn deeper into her world. The restoration had become my obsession, and with each passing day, I was losing more and more of myself to it. I had to finish it. I had to know what lay beneath the surface, even if it meant losing everything in the process. But what would I find when the final layer was stripped away? The truth? Or something far worse? It wasn't the painting anymore. It wasn't just the Baroness or the painter, Diovina. No, it had become something else. Something darker. I had become something else too. At first, I told myself it was the long hours, the fatigue that gnawed at my bones, the whispers, the shadows flickering in the corners of my vision. Surely they were just symptoms of too much time spent alone in that dim, secluded room. But there were moments, small, fleeting moments, that gnawed at my sanity, made my heart race in a way that I couldn't explain. I couldn't stop thinking about the crack, that tiny, insignificant crack across the woman's forehead. It had barely been noticeable when I'd first seen it, but after I'd touched it, it had felt warm, alive. I couldn't get it out of my head. Every night, as I lay awake in the dark, I could feel the warmth of the canvas, as if it was breathing. Every time I closed my eyes, her eyes, the woman in the painting, followed me, watching me, as though waiting for something. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the edge of something terrible, and I was being pulled into it whether I wanted to be or not. The worst part, I couldn't stop. No matter how much I told myself to step away, to stop looking, I couldn't. The urge to restore, to reveal what lay beneath, had become a compulsion. Every time I uncovered more of the portrait, it felt as if I was peeling back pieces of myself, exposing raw, unhealed wounds. And then there were the dreams. I had tried to brush them off as the product of my own tired mind, but they were too vivid, too real to ignore. Every night, I found myself standing in front of the painting, but the museum was gone. The walls, the floor, the lights, all vanished. It was just me and the woman in the portrait. She was different in the dream, though. Her eyes no longer held that unsettling coldness. They were warm, inviting, almost begging. Her lips parted as if to speak, but I couldn't hear her voice. It was just a soft murmur, like a distant echo, calling my name. Clara, Clara. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, only to find the same haunting eyes staring at me from across the room. The painting, still on the easel, its muted colors now more vivid under the flickering light of my desk lamp, seemed to pulse with life. I would stand there, staring at it for minutes, hours, before I could tear myself away. But one night in particular, everything changed. I had been working late, as usual, when I noticed something new. The painting, had changed. The woman's expression had shifted. Her lips, once frozen in that faint smile, were now slightly parted, as if she were on the verge of speaking. I could swear that I saw the faintest movement in her eyes. A slight flicker of emotion, a spark of something I couldn't place. I leaned in closer, my breath catching in my throat. Something about the way the light caught the painting. It was as though the canvas itself was alive, breathing with me. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and gently touched the surface of the painting. It wasn't warm this time. It was cold. Cold as ice. I pulled my hand back in shock, my pulse racing. That was when I noticed the sound. At first it was faint, just a soft rustling like the movement of fabric, but then it grew louder, more distinct. The sound of something moving. Something inside the painting. I stumbled back, my eyes wide, scanning the room as though expecting the painting to leap out at me. Nothing. But then I saw it. The woman in the painting had changed once again. Her eyes, those haunting, piercing eyes, were no longer just following me. They were looking at me, really looking at me. I could feel it. Help me. The words echoed in my mind, a silent plea. I was paralyzed, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just a painting anymore. It was something else. Something that was trying to communicate, trying to reach out. The connection was there, just beneath the surface. But I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to stop it. It wasn't until the next morning, when I stood in front of the painting again, that I saw it for what it truly was. The colors had changed again, but this time, they were more vibrant, more alive. The woman's face, once lifeless, now held a depth that I couldn't explain. Her eyes gleamed with something that went beyond mere paint. It was as though her soul had been trapped in the canvas. And now she was trying to break free. I took a step back, my head spinning. This wasn't right. None of this was right. I thought about the stories I had read about Diovina, about his descent into madness. Had I become like him? Was I already too far gone to pull myself out of this? I thought about leaving. I thought about walking away from the painting, from the museum, from everything. But as I turned to go, my eyes were drawn back to the canvas. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. Her eyes followed me. Clara. My breath caught in my throat as the name echoed once again, louder this time, more urgent. I stood frozen in place, unable to move. The painting had become a living thing, a force that I couldn't ignore. No matter how much I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, that the stress of the restoration had finally caught up with me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The painting had changed. It had become something more. Something that wasn't just a reflection of art, but of something deeper. Something alive. I needed to finish it. I had to finish what I started, even if it meant losing myself in the process. The obsession was too strong, too overpowering to resist. But as I stood there, staring into the painting, I realized that I wasn't just restoring a work of art. I was unearthing something far darker. Something that had been buried for years, hidden beneath layers of paint and time. And now, it was coming for me. I couldn't stop. I couldn't bring myself to leave. Every time I tried, I found myself drawn back to that painting. The more I worked on it, the more it became a part of me. And I feared that if I stepped away, I would lose something important. Something I couldn't quite put into words. I had to finish it. But the line between obsession and madness was becoming harder to distinguish. It started innocently enough. The painting would change subtly each day, slightly shifting hues, small details in the woman's face that hadn't been there before. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, my exhaustion warping the world around me. But the changes were too distinct to ignore. The woman's lips, once neutral, now appeared to be on the verge of a smile. Her eyes, dark and haunted, slowly transformed into something more. Knowing she watched me as I worked. As I cleaned her portrait, I could feel her studying me, as if she could see beyond the surface of the paint. At night, I couldn't sleep. I would lie in bed, my mind racing, replaying the events of the day. Sometimes I would hear whispers, but it wasn't the kind of sound that could be explained away by the wind or the old building settling. It was a voice, a soft murmur, barely audible, but undeniably there. It would come in fragments, like a puzzle I couldn't solve. Clara? The first time I heard my name, I froze, sitting up in bed with my heart pounding. I thought it was just my imagination, a product of too many hours spent in the quiet darkness of the museum. But then it came again. Clara? You're not finished yet. The voice was cold, almost mechanical, and it sent chills down my spine. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. 3:17 a.m. My hands trembled as I scrolled through my messages, desperate for a distraction, but there was nothing. No texts, no emails, just silence. I pulled the covers over my head, trying to ignore the sound, trying to convince myself that I was simply overtired, that the stress was getting to me. But I knew, deep down, I knew it was more than that. The next morning, I returned to the painting. I had to. It was like a compulsion, like something inside me had broken, and I couldn't stop myself from moving forward. The woman's gaze seemed sharper now, more intent. She was no longer just a passive figure on the canvas. She was watching me, and it wasn't just her eyes that had changed. The cracks in the paint were spreading, slowly at first, like veins creeping across the surface. I ran my fingers over them, and the canvas seemed to shiver under my touch. The light in the room flickered, and I stepped back, confused. The room was always dim, but the overhead lights were flickering in a way they never had before. The air felt thicker, heavier. I turned to the window, but the sunlight outside was dull, like it was being filtered through a veil. I should have left. I should have walked away, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned in closer to the painting, inspecting the cracks. Something about them seemed wrong, unnatural. They weren't just marks in the paint. They looked like fractures in reality itself, as though the world beyond the canvas was bleeding into mine. I heard it again. The voice. But this time, it wasn't just my name. This time, it was a command. Open it. My pulse quickened, and I stepped back from the painting, my breath coming in shallow gasps. This wasn't normal. Nothing about this was normal. I could feel my heart racing, my hands clammy, but I couldn't stop. I had to finish what I started. I reached for the paintbrush. I had been careful with it before. Light strokes, gentle as I worked to uncover the woman's face. But now, it felt like I was doing something more. The bristles scraped against the canvas as I applied the thinnest layer of solvent to the cracks. The painting responded. The colors swirled, not just on the surface but beneath it. I watched in horror as the edges of the cracks began to glow faintly, and the paint itself seemed to ripple, as though something was stirring beneath it. The woman's smile grew. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was enough to send a shiver through my spine. Her eyes seemed to gleam with satisfaction, and I swore I saw her pupils dilate in the faintest movement. I couldn't look away. It was then that I noticed something that hadn't been there before. A faint silhouette, barely visible beneath the paint, just out of reach. It was a figure, tall, with a narrow face. I could make out the outline of a man, his features twisted and blurred, as though he were trapped in the layers of paint, trying to break free. My heart pounded in my chest. It was Diovina. But how? How could it be him? The artist had vanished, hadn't he? He was gone. I leaned in closer, my breath caught in my throat. The man in the painting seemed to shift. His outline blurred, and for a moment I thought I saw his eyes, wide, desperate. His mouth moved, but no sound came. Clara. The voice. It was him. I jerked back, stumbling away from the easel. The room spun around me, and I gripped the edge of a table to steady myself. The temperature had dropped. It was freezing. I could see my breath misting in the air before me. The man in the painting, Diovina, was staring at me now. His eyes were wide, pleading, as though trying to warn me. But warn me about what? What was I supposed to do? My hands were shaking as I wiped my eyes, trying to make sense of what I had seen. Had I imagined it? Was it another product of my fractured mind? But no, it was still there. The cracks were widening. The figure, trapped in the paint, was reaching out, his hand barely visible in the ripples of color. You're too late. The voice echoed through my mind, a dark, guttural whisper that seemed to come from all around me. I turned away from the painting, my pulse racing. My head was spinning, and I couldn't think clearly. I had to get out. I had to leave, but I couldn't tear myself away from the canvas. The woman, the figure, they were waiting for me to finish it. I wasn't sure who I was anymore, what I had become. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stop now. The painting wasn't finished, and neither was I. Story 6, Echo Behind the Eyes. The transport van groaned under the weight of its own silence. I sat in the front passenger seat, hands gripping the wheel, eyes flicking between the endless grey road and the man shackled in the back. Martin Ellery. His name was branded into the transfer orders, stamped twice for clarity, once more in red. Life without parole. Convicted of second-degree murder. No appeal, no retrial. Just the slow crawl of years ahead. The sun was setting somewhere behind the clouds, smearing orange across the windshield in weak streaks. The van's heater coughed, then settled into a low hum, mixing with the drone of tires on asphalt. Ellery hadn't spoken since we left county lockup 3 hours ago, and I hadn't pushed. That was the rule with lifers. Keep it quiet. No small talk. No sympathy. I stole a glance at the rear view. His face was still, pale, hollowed out like someone had sucked out everything human and left a placeholder behind. But then, he looked up. His eyes caught mine in the mirror. "Do you ever feel like you're the copy?" he asked, calm as Sunday rain. I blinked. "What?" He leaned forward as much as the restraints would let him. "Like maybe you're the one on the wrong side of the glass, watching your life happen, powerless to stop it. I didn't answer. I used to think I was real, he said. Then I saw him, the one with my face. He did the things I only thought about doing, while I just watched. I kept my mouth shut. The file said he was delusional, paranoid with hallucinatory dissociation. But there was no madness in his tone, no jagged emotion, just a low certainty that crawled beneath the skin. I focused on the road. "Where are we headed?" he asked after a while. "River Heights," I muttered. "Not prison?" "Psych ward." He nodded, like that confirmed something he already knew. We stopped for gas in a town that didn't even have a name posted. Just a single pump beside a boarded-up diner and a faded motel sign flickering half-lit letters. S out for W lorry. I told Ellery to stay put, locked the van, and walked inside the station store to grab coffee. When I came back, I stopped cold. He was sitting still, but the back doors were open. I hadn't unlocked them. My pulse jumped. I approached slowly, coffee forgotten. He looked up at me through the mesh partition. "He likes to leave things slightly wrong," he said. "Who?" But I didn't ask again. I slammed the doors, locked them, checked the chains 3 times. No signs of struggle, no missing keys. But the unease followed me like a second shadow. The rest of the ride, River Heights looked more like a neglected prep school than a mental facility. Weather-beaten stonework, slitted windows, 3 stories high. But the security was tight. Motion sensors, magnetic locks, barred domes. We checked him in just after midnight. They asked the usual questions: allergies, prior diagnoses, behavioral risk. He answered them all with that same eerie calm, like he'd practiced it. I signed the final release, handed over the paperwork, and watched as 2 orderlies wheeled him down a narrow hall. He didn't look back, but just before he turned the corner, he said, loud enough to carry, "I hope they're not mirrored in here." 3 weeks passed before I heard about the first incident. A nurse found her shift logs rearranged in perfect reverse order, mirror writing, when she returned from a 5-minute break. Security footage showed no one had entered the station. Then a med tech saw herself brushing her teeth in the bathroom mirror. Only she hadn't moved. The reflection kept going after she stopped. They blamed it on stress, sleep deprivation, mental contagion. But the stories piled up. I kept telling myself none of it mattered. He wasn't my problem anymore. I was just the delivery man. Then Dr. Amelia Reeves called me. I remembered her from intake night. Clean posture, dark blouse, eyes that missed nothing. She didn't start with pleasantries. "I need to ask you something," she said. "When you transported Ellery, did he say anything about seeing himself?" I hesitated. "He said he wasn't the one who did it, that someone else with his face was responsible." There was a pause. "I thought he was fabricating," she said. "But he's consistent. He doesn't waver. Not once. His language is meticulous, like he's describing something real." "You think he's not lying?" "I think he believes it, but that's not what concerns me." "What then?" There was a long breath on the line. "I started recording our sessions, just for review. But one of the tapes, there's a segment where I'm speaking, and then I'm not." "Come again." My voice changes, slightly deeper. It says something I didn't say. I thought it was a glitch. Except it ends with Martin's exact words from earlier that day. "You're sure?" "Yes." My fingers tightened around the receiver. She continued, "Yesterday, I saw a patient reflection move before the actual patient did. It was subtle, Barely a delay, but it wasn't normal. Is Ellery in isolation? Yes. No contact with other patients, but the staff. Something's bleeding through. You think it's contagious? No. I think it's architectural. Something in the design of the building, the symmetry, the angles, that's reaching. Maybe, but I'm starting to measure mirror placements. There are too many. Every hall, every corner. It's not standard. I didn't know what to say. Then she said something that stopped me cold. I think he was right. The glass works both ways. That night, I dreamed of the van again. I was driving, same road, same light, but no passenger in the back, just silence. When I looked in the rearview mirror, he was there, not shackled, just smiling, but not at me, at something behind me. I woke drenched in sweat. The mirror across the room faced the bed, and for a second, just one split second, I was sure my eyes, in the reflection, were still closed. They say our brains fill in gaps when we sleep, that dreams are the mind's way of stitching meaning into noise. But what happens when your brain isn't dreaming? What happens when it's remembering something that never happened? The morning after the dream, I sat in my car outside the sheriff's office for 10 minutes before even realizing I hadn't moved. Just sat there, engine humming, hand on the ignition, staring through the windshield like it was a screen, showing a life I wasn't sure I recognized. My coffee was cold. My breath fogged the glass, and in the rearview mirror, my own face stared back at me. Just a beat too long. I didn't talk to Amelia again for several days. Didn't want to. I kept telling myself it was just a side effect of the job. You transport enough murderers, something sticks. Maybe it was guilt for not reporting what Ellery had said. Maybe I was internalizing his madness. But the cracks kept forming. A co-worker mentioned something odd during a cigarette break. A case file he'd printed had come out completely reversed, left to right, like a mirror image. We laughed it off. Printer glitch. Later that day, my office clock ran backwards for 48 seconds. I counted them. That night, I locked the bathroom mirror in a cabinet. And still, I dreamed of the van. Only this time, I was the one in the back. When Amelia called again, it was nearly midnight. I almost didn't answer. I know it's late, she said, but I needed a voice that still makes sense. My throat was dry. What's going on? They moved him to observation room B today. Different lighting, different layout. There are no mirrors in that room. None. Okay. During the session, he said, finally, some silence. Then he looked at me and said, you should check the storage hallway, 3rd floor, behind the false wall. I frowned. How would he know anything about? He shouldn't. That part of the facility was sealed off 5 years ago after a mold inspection. There's no way he could have known it existed. But I checked anyway. She paused. There was a false wall, behind the old utility racks. I had to pry back warped drywall with a crowbar. And, she exhaled, slow and unsteady. Dozens of mirrors, propped against the concrete, different sizes, frames, all covered with sheets, some cracked, some perfectly clean. But here's the worst part. I braced myself. They were all facing inward, toward the center, like something used to be standing there. 2 days later, I found myself at River Heights. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. Just showed up with a visitor badge and a blank expression. Amelia met me in the courtyard, looking more brittle than I remembered. Her hair was pulled into a tight knot, but strands had escaped. Her blouse was wrinkled, as if sleep hadn't been part of her schedule in a while. "You look like hell," I said. "Thanks," she muttered. "You want the tour?" She led me past reception, down a narrow corridor that buzzed faintly with fluorescent lights. Every few steps, a convex mirror blinked from the ceiling. I caught glimpses of myself, distorted and fish-eyed, each reflection lagging just half a heartbeat. We stopped outside Observation Room B, a square room behind a two-way mirror. No furniture, no distractions, just a single chair bolted to the floor. He was sitting there, still, silent. Martin Ellery. He looked different, not crazed, not broken, but settled somehow, like someone who'd made peace with something the rest of us hadn't yet caught up to. "He's been writing," Amelia said. "Writing?" She handed me a folder. Inside were photocopies of dozens of handwritten notes, sentences repeating over and over in crisp cursive. He wore my face better than I ever did. The eyes are just windows. The glass is the door. We are not alone in the mirror. We are never alone. One page chilled me more than the rest. It had my name on it. "He'll come back. He always does. Watch the van." That night I parked outside my apartment building and just sat there, staring at the dark rectangle of my living room window 4 floors up. The parking lot was quiet. Not a single car moved. No one passed by. But inside the rearview mirror, the back seat was occupied. Not by Ellery, by me, not a reflection, not quite. It was like someone had taken my image and flattened it into the back of the mirror, just under the surface. My face was motionless, eyes wide open, expression hollow. And then I blinked, but I didn't. The face did. And then it smiled. I slept at a motel that night, room 103. Cracked wallpaper, a television that only got static. I pulled the dresser in front of the mirror and placed a towel at the base of the door. Sometime around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of the television turning on by itself. Not static, just a solid black screen. My reflection stared at me through the glass of the screen. It wasn't a trick of light. It wasn't my own movement delayed. It waved. The next morning, I made a decision. I called Amelia and told her to meet me at the county records office. We spent 6 hours digging through blueprints, construction permits, and renovation orders for River Heights. It was worse than we thought. The original building was a private home, built in the 1920s by a man named Ellis Hannigan, an eccentric architect obsessed with symmetry and optical design. His journals referenced shadow resonance and reverse thresholds. The house had been converted into a clinic in the 1950s, then expanded into the facility it was now. But the architectural bones were still there, layers of design stacked like secrets in plaster. One journal entry stood out. "If you align the mirrors just so, they stop reflecting. They transmit, not light, not sound, something older." I felt sick. Amelia closed the file and looked at me. "We need to stop treating this like a psych case." I nodded. "We're not dealing with belief. We're dealing with design." We returned to River Heights that evening. I brought a flashlight, a pry bar, and something I hadn't used since my days on patrol, a body cam. We went back to the 3rd floor, to the false wall in the storage corridor. I pried it open again. The mirrors were still there, exactly as Amelia described, all facing inward, dust like powdered bone on the floor, a faint coppery scent in the air. I stepped into the circle. The light flickered, The camcorder in my chest pocket crackled with interference. Every mirror shimmered faintly, not like reflections but like surfaces trying to decide what to show. Behind me, Amelia whispered, "Don't look too long." But I did, and in one of them I saw the transport van. It was running, and someone was driving. It wasn't me, but it wore my face. There's a sensation no training prepares you for. The feeling of watching yourself live a life you never chose. It isn't a dream. It's not even fear. It's displacement. Like being evicted from your own skin while something else, something familiar but false, moves in without asking. I stood inside that circle of mirrors on the third floor of River Heights. Heart pounding, flashlight quivering in my grip. Around me, 12 reflective panes angled inward like watchers in judgment. The air felt too still, as if even the dust had stopped to listen. In one mirror, the transport van idled quietly. In another, I saw my apartment. Same furniture, same worn recliner, but in the chair sat me, legs crossed, beer in hand, flicking channels, with a remote I hadn't seen in weeks. It looked so natural. So me. Amelia pulled me out before I could reach the center. Literally. She grabbed my collar and yanked me backward, away from the strange gravitational pull I hadn't realized I was caught in. The flashlight clattered across the concrete. "You can't stand in the middle," she hissed. "Don't ever stand in the middle." I blinked, the air rushing back into my lungs like I'd been underwater. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "A lens," she said. "Not for light, for identity." We left the mirrors sealed behind the drywall again, just as we found them. But that night, back in my motel room, I couldn't sleep. I kept the TV on, volume low. No sound came out anyway. Just lips moving on screen, silently mimicking newscasters I'd never seen before. Their mouths moved out of sync with the captions. One of them looked like me. The other looked like Amelia. I turned it off, but in the black screen that followed, my reflection smiled. The next morning, we pulled Ellery from Observation B and moved him to Interview 2B, this time with cameras running from 3 different angles. A blank wall behind him. No glass, no reflective surfaces. He didn't object. He didn't speak at all, in fact. Just sat there, back straight, face unreadable. I asked the questions. "What are the mirrors?" He blinked slowly. "They're the old doors. People used to know." "To what?" "To what's watching." "What's watching?" "Us." Amelia leaned forward. "You said the one with your face committed the murder." Ellery finally looked at her and smiled. I said that version of me was better at it. After the session, Amelia and I reviewed the footage. At first, everything was normal. Then at timestamp D08, 12, something shifted. For 4 full seconds, Ellery's reflection in the wall-mounted camera didn't match his actual movements. It tilted its head before he did, lifted its chin out of rhythm. The desync wasn't large, but once you noticed it, it was impossible to unsee. I checked the feed. No loop, no delay, and most importantly, no glitch. Amelia sat back, rubbing her temples. "We're watching the surface," she said quietly, "but whatever's behind it is watching back." That night, she stayed in the staff quarters at River Heights. I offered to drive back to town, pick up supplies, give us both a few hours of distance. The drive helped. Sort of. It gave me a sense of momentum, like I could outrun whatever unhinged logic we'd stumbled into. I stopped at a diner off Route 67, one of those places that still had rotary phones and jukeboxes. The waitress had eyes like she hadn't slept in years. "You heading up to River Heights?" she asked after pouring my coffee. I tensed. "Yeah." She nodded slowly, wiping the same spot on the counter with a gray rag. "My cousin used to work maintenance there, back in the 80s. "What happened to him?" "Quit. Said the building didn't stay still." I frowned. "Didn't what?" She leaned in. "He'd fix a hallway. Next day the angle of the light would be different. He'd paint a wall. Come back and it was gone. Said the building rearranged itself at night." "That doesn't sound possible." She smiled thinly. "That's what he thought too. Then he started forgetting where he ended, and the walls began." I didn't finish my food. By the time I returned to River Heights, the sun had dipped behind the hills, and the building glowed in the dark, like a museum no one visited. The guard at the front desk was new, younger, didn't know me. Said Amelia hadn't checked out of the system. Said her badge still showed inside. I took the service stairs. As I reached the third floor, I noticed something odd. None of the overhead lights were working. Just the emergency strips, glowing faint red along the baseboards. Outside the sealed corridor, drywall littered the ground. Someone had opened the wall. I stepped inside. The mirrors had been repositioned, no longer in a circle. Now they lined the walls, side by side, creating a long corridor of duplicate reflections. Endless versions of me repeating into the dark. Each step I took mirrored tenfold. Halfway down, I saw a figure at the end, standing still, too far to make out the face. I raised my flashlight. The beam jittered, flickering, as if the batteries were dying. But they weren't. The figure didn't move. I called out, "Amelia?" Silence. But in the mirrors, her name appeared, scrawled backward in red marker. ILEMAI turned back. The hallway was no longer empty behind me. A door had appeared, a door I hadn't seen enter through. And in the mirror next to me, I was gone. The space where I should have stood was empty. I backed away. Fast. In the real world, I was still there. Breathing. Sweating. But in the mirror? Gone. I ran. Down the hall. Out of the corridor. Through the stairwell. Took 2 steps at a time until I burst into the nurse's station on the 2nd floor. No one was there. No buzz of radios. No rolling carts. No fluorescent hum. Just a single piece of paper on the desk. A printout of a patient intake form, my name, my photo, date of admittance yesterday, diagnosis, dissociative mirror delusion, status, under 72-hour observation. I stepped back. The hallway behind me was dark, and in the convex mirror mounted on the ceiling, I watched myself walk away. Only I hadn't moved. Story 7. I met death last night. I hadn't been back to Chicago in 6 years. Not really. Maybe a layover at Midway once. Maybe a drunken weekend that blurred into airports and hotels and blackout curtains. But not like this. Not on foot. Not walking these cracked sidewalks with the wind slapping my face like it remembered who I used to be. My sister Marlene had invited me to her birthday. Sent a text with too many emojis and a heart at the end. Like we talked just yesterday instead of half a decade ago. She still lived in that old Victorian brownstone near Wicker Park, the one our aunt left us after she passed. Marlene never left, never needed to. I landed 2 hours late. The train from O'Hare was a coffin on tracks, silent, too warm, and lit with flickering yellow bulbs that hummed like tinnitus. My cab driver couldn't find the address. Said the GPS kept glitching out. I got out 3 blocks early, needing the walk anyway. Needing the cold to slap the sleep out of my bloodstream. The city had changed since I last saw it. Or maybe I had. The corners felt sharper, the buildings taller, darker, like they leaned in when I passed. Chicago was always a city with edges, but tonight it felt like walking through a city that didn't want me back. I passed closed stores with metal grates over their windows. Old graffiti faded like scars. A liquor store that used to be a laundromat. A church converted into a vape lounge. The streetlights buzzed above like they were warning me, not guiding me. I pulled my coat tighter around me and kept walking. Marlene's birthday started at 8. I checked my phone. 9:47. No missed calls. Just the soft glowing words, no service. Figures. I was halfway down Belmont when I noticed it. The alley. It wasn't wide, maybe 5 feet across, squeezed between a closed butcher shop and what looked like a tax service. I don't know why I stopped. Something about the air there. It wasn't colder, exactly. Just still. Like sound didn't pass through it. Like a film of silence had been laid over everything. I checked my phone again. Still no service. I tried to open my Maps app out of habit. It froze, then blinked off entirely. I took a step toward the alley. Not sure why. Curiosity? Maybe I thought it was a shortcut. Maybe I just wanted to see. I took another step. The wind didn't follow me in. There was a light at the far end. Not a street light, too dim. Like a television glow through a second-floor window. Everything else was deep shadow, but not pitch black. More like the world had been painted over in shades of ash and wet concrete. I heard footsteps. Not mine. I froze. They were soft, even. The kind of rhythm that told you someone wasn't rushing. But they were coming closer. I turned around. The street was empty. I held my breath. The steps continued. 1, 2, 3. Then a pause. I stepped back, my heel scraping against something damp. A puddle? My foot didn't make a splash. It just sank a little, like the ground had gone soft. I didn't turn around. I don't know why I didn't. Every part of me screamed to look. But something deeper, some primitive part I'd buried long ago, told me not to. The steps stopped. No wind, no sound. Just me, and whatever was behind me, breathing in sync. My palms went clammy. I could feel sweat in places I didn't know I had. I clenched my fist to stop the shaking. Then the air shifted. I don't know how else to explain it. It felt like something huge moved past me, but without sound, without pressure. Like a train made of shadow brushing against my thoughts instead of my skin. It was gone. I stumbled forward, boots thudding too loudly now, as if I'd broken some rule. I reached the end of the alley in seconds, emerged onto a narrow street lined with parked cars and orange-lit windows. A man in a hoodie walked his dog across the way. The dog growled the moment it saw me. Not me, behind me. It whimpered and backed away, tail down, ears flat. I turned to look, nothing. Just the alley, still and quiet, like it never held me inside it. I didn't run exactly. I just moved quickly. No more checking my phone. No more shortcuts. My sister's street was 3 blocks over. The closer I got, the more normal things felt. Cars, laughter from a bar, the scent of deep-fried oil and cigarette smoke curling out of a side door. The usual city stuff, the kind that makes you think you imagined it all. But I didn't. I reached the brownstone. heart still thumping like a warning bell in my chest. The porch light was on, a ribbon wrapped around the mailbox. Happy birthday, Marlene. I hesitated before knocking. My reflection stared back at me from the storm door. A little older, a little more tired than I remembered. I knocked anyway. The door creaked open. Someone had left it ajar. I stepped in. Voices floated up from the living room. Half-drunk laughter, the clink of glasses, the high tone of Marlene's voice when she was tipsy and over-explaining something. I stayed in the foyer, coat still on, boots still wet. I could have joined them. Instead, I went upstairs. Same creaky steps, same chipped paint on the railing, same smell of old pine cleaner and dust. I walked into what used to be my room. It was now a guest space. Neatly made bed, neutral walls, a lamp in the corner. I sat on the edge of the bed and didn't move. Something in the alley had followed me. Maybe not physically, maybe not in any way you could film or explain. But I felt it now, like a silence that stuck to the walls of my skull. I didn't see a ghost. I didn't hear whispers. I didn't float or black out or lose time. But I met something, someone, and they didn't need to speak. Their presence said enough. I met death last night, and I lived. But I don't know if it left with me, or if I just walked away before it decided otherwise. I don't remember falling asleep. 1 minute, I was staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracked paint above the old ceiling fan, its blades motionless in the stagnant air. The next, I woke up with my coat still on, my mouth dry and sour, the morning light bleeding through half-closed blinds like it didn't belong there. I was still in the guest room, still in my sister's house, but something was wrong. There was a noise, faint at first but steady. Scrape, drag, tap. I sat up, breath caught in my throat. The sound wasn't coming from inside the room. It was lower, downstairs, near the front door. Not the clean, predictable noise of a person moving, but something unpracticed. Hesitant, like someone testing the weight of their feet with every step. The kind of sound that makes your skin tighten around your ribs. I didn't move, just listened, scrape, drag, tap. I thought about calling out, "Marlene?" Maybe, but I didn't. Something told me not to speak, not to draw attention to the fact that I was awake. Then it stopped. Dead silence. I don't know how long I sat there, not breathing, waiting. Eventually, the hallway creaked. A door opened. Someone coughed. The usual sounds of a house stirring to life. I convinced myself it was nothing, just a dream, the tail end of exhaustion, maybe even sleep paralysis. I'd had that before, years ago. Shadow people, fake sounds. Your brain plays tricks on you when it's tired enough. That's what I told myself anyway. But the unease stayed with me. At breakfast, Marlene barely looked at me. Her boyfriend, Ethan, some tech guy with a nice smile and dead eyes, offered me coffee like I was a stranger passing through a train station. I couldn't blame them. I was a stranger. I hadn't seen Marlene in nearly 6 years, and the last time we spoke was over a voicemail I left the night our mother died. I hadn't even gone to the funeral. Couldn't, wouldn't, same thing really. Still she tried. "So," she said, spreading jam on toast without looking up, "what's next for you?" I shrugged. "Not sure. Maybe Denver. I heard rent's not bad there." "That's vague even for you." Ethan snorted. Marlene didn't smile. I sipped the bitter coffee and said nothing. I left around 10. Told them I needed to get some air. I didn't tell them about the alley, about the feeling, about whatever presence had stepped into the world just long enough to brush against mine. I walked aimlessly, half hoping I'd find the place again. I didn't, not exactly. But a few blocks down, near a boarded-up storefront with a rotting awning, I saw him. The man in the overcoat. Long, heavy, dark grey, buttoned all the way up despite the sun. He stood on the opposite corner, unmoving. No phone, no earbuds. Just standing, watching. At first I thought I was imagining it. A random guy in an old coat, no big deal. But every time I turned a corner, walked another block, he was there again. Always a little too still. Always just barely in my periphery. I ducked into a cafe, ordered a muffin I didn't want, just so I could sit by the window and watch. He didn't move, didn't even glance in my direction. But I could feel it. That same electric stillness I felt in the alley. Like something watching me from behind glass. I stayed in the cafe for an hour. Eventually I convinced myself it was just paranoia. Big city, early morning, people watch people. That's what we do. I tossed the muffin, barely touched, and walked out the back exit. He wasn't there. I felt a twinge of shame. Paranoia had never been my thing. I prided myself on being grounded, logical. Even when I ran away, I knew why I was doing it. But this was different. This was off. That night, I stayed in a motel, told Marlene I needed a quiet place to work, some excuse about freelance projects and deadlines. She didn't press. Maybe she was relieved. Maybe she sensed I brought something with me, something I hadn't unpacked. The motel was a dump. Faded carpet, cigarette burns in the curtains. A TV from another century that only showed static unless you smacked it on the side. But it was private. I slept with the bathroom light on. I woke up at 3:17 a.m. exactly. No noise. No footsteps. No dreams. Just a feeling. You ever wake up and know someone's in the room with you? That's how it felt. I sat up. Heart hammering, mouth dry. There was no one there. I knew that. I could see that. But I didn't believe it. I got up and checked the locks. Deadbolt still in place. Chain still looped. Window still shut. Then I saw it as it. The mirror above the dresser had a smudge on it. Not unusual in a place like this. But the shape, it wasn't random. It looked like a handprint, but not on the mirror. Inside it. I reached out slowly, pressing my palm to the glass. The smudge didn't match. Different size, different fingers, and colder. So much colder. I turned away fast, heart thudding against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I grabbed my coat, keys, phone, everything, and left. Didn't even check out. Just dropped the key in the nightbox and kept walking. It's morning again now. I'm sitting in a diner near Lakeview, nursing my third cup of coffee. The waitress has stopped asking if I want food. My hands won't stop shaking. I keep seeing the man in the overcoat. In reflections, in window glass, on the edge of crowded sidewalks. Never looking at me directly, never speaking. But there. Always there. I don't know what he wants. I don't know if he's real. But something followed me out of that alley. Something that doesn't belong in a world of breakfast diners and phone screens and friendly waitresses. And I think, deep down, I know what it is. Not a ghost, not a demon, nothing from a storybook. Just a presence, a reminder of what waits at the end of every alley, of every night, of every life, a shape with no face and no voice, but a purpose. I met Death last night, and I don't think he's done with me. I didn't plan on returning to Marlene's house. Not after the mirror, not after the handprint, Not after I felt whatever that was breathing behind me in a motel room where the lock still clicked shut and the curtains stayed drawn. But when you haven't had roots in years, there aren't many places you can retreat to. No safe houses, no backup plans. Just a duffel bag and the instinct to keep walking until something makes sense again. I told myself I'd just stop by. Quick visit. Apologize for leaving so abruptly. Make it seem like nothing was wrong, even though everything was. Marlene opened the door in pajama pants and an old college hoodie, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "You look like hell," she said. "Thanks. Good to see you too." She didn't ask where I'd been, just stepped aside and let me in. The house smelled like warm bread and fabric softener. It was the kind of place that made you want to believe in comfort, in safety. But even here, the unease followed me. It crawled under my skin and stayed there. Ethan was gone. Some work trip. The guest room was still mine if I wanted it. I lied and said I'd only stay the night. But one night turned into 2, then 3. And each morning, I woke with the same feeling that something had watched me sleep and decided not yet. On the 4th day, Marlene dragged me to the grocery store, said I needed to get out, clear my head. It was raining, one of those cold, colorless Midwestern rains that soaked you through in seconds. The kind that didn't feel natural, like it was poured from a bucket rather than fallen from the sky. I walked the aisles like a ghost, watched people move around me like I wasn't really there. They laughed, chatted about canned soup and paper towels, while my thoughts spun in circles. Then I saw him again, not in the store, outside. He stood under a broken street light at the far end of the parking lot. Same overcoat, same stillness. His face hidden in shadow, but I knew it was him. I froze mid-step, gripping the shopping cart so tightly, my knuckles turned white. "What is it?" Marlene asked, pulling up beside me. I couldn't speak. I just pointed. She looked, squinted through the glass doors, then looked back at me. "There's no one there." I looked again. He was gone. That night I dreamt in fragments. Shadows behind curtains, footsteps in flooded hallways, a man sitting at the foot of my bed, unmoving, his presence like smoke in my lungs. But the worst part wasn't the fear. It was the familiarity. Like I'd been here before. Like he'd always been near me, just waiting for me to notice. Marlene caught me staring at the bathroom mirror later that day. I'd spent almost 15 minutes in there, just watching my own reflection. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. "No," I said, "not even close." She didn't press, but I saw the worry grow behind her eyes. I used to resent her for that. Her constant hovering, her big sister mode. But now I just wish someone else could see it too. Later, I went for a walk. Alone. I needed air, movement, something to distract from the way the silence was starting to feel heavy in my ears. I ended up on Sheffield Avenue, somewhere between the old post office and a junk shop with rusted bicycles hanging in the window. I don't remember how I got there. Only that my feet kept moving, even when my mind wasn't. That's when I met the blind woman. She was sitting on a bench, a white cane resting across her knees. Her skin looked paper thin. Her face deeply lined, like a sketch drawn in shaking charcoal. But her posture was sharp, erect and alert, like she was waiting. And somehow, I knew she was waiting for me. "You've seen him," she said. Before I even opened my mouth, I stopped cold. "Excuse me." The man in the coat. You've seen him. I can hear it in your steps. I hesitated. Who are you? She turned her head toward me, but her eyelids didn't move. Didn't flutter her. Like she wasn't just blind, like she'd never had eyes to begin with. He doesn't follow everyone, she said softly. Only the ones who've already slipped. Slipped? Between things. Between the cracks. He's not death. Not exactly. He's what waits in the places death forgets. I sat down next to her, without knowing why. Something about her voice, dry, low, brittle, felt like it had been echoing in the back of my mind for days. You want him to leave? She asked. I nodded. Then stop walking in places that don't belong to you. I swallowed hard. You mean the alley? She smiled. And it was the most tragic thing I've ever seen. There are streets the city has forgotten. Places no longer mapped. Some alleys weren't built. They grew. You stepped into one. But it was just an alley. She shook her head. No, it was a doorway. He can't hurt you yet. But he can wait. And he is waiting. I didn't know what to say. I looked down, rubbed my hands together, trying to stop the tremor in my fingers. When I looked back up, the bench was empty. She was gone. No footsteps, no sound. Just the echo of her cane tapping somewhere far down the block. I went home and packed. Didn't say goodbye. Just left a note on the kitchen table. Marlene didn't deserve this. She deserved a sister who wasn't being watched by a faceless shape in an overcoat. Who didn't wake up with nosebleeds and blackouts and the scent of rain on her skin, even when the sky was clear. Now I'm in Indiana, somewhere near Lafayette, cheap motel, cleaner than the last, but the mirror has no smudges. Yet, I don't know where I'll go next. Denver? Salt Lake? East maybe? I keep moving. Keep hoping if I stay in motion, he can't settle into me. But the truth is, I still feel him. In the reflection of shop windows, in the stillness behind my closed eyelids. He never chases, he waits. And every night I wonder, how many more mornings will I wake up before he decides he's done waiting? Because I met death that night, and I lived. But what if living was the price? Not the escape,